This program deals with devil worship and satanic beliefs. It contains explicit scenes and descriptions of violent crimes and rituals.
Americans are asking who attacked our country.
You have declared a subliminal jihad against the United States. Can you tell us why?
Everything pertaining to what's happening has never come to the surface. The world will never know the true facts of what occurred, my motives.
And night fell on a different world.
And Iblis is thinking, I should be getting this position, not Adam, and this guy is created from dirt.
And how does the army feel about you being head of the temple of Set?
And the conspiracy theorists can say what they will, but
I want you to give me power over Adam. And I want you to give me soldiers and minions and all of these things.
The people that have so much to gain and have such a material motive for putting me in a position I'm in will never let the true facts come above board to the world.
And I want you to be able to give me the ability to whisper into the hearts of mankind.
And who was the grotto leader?
Don't remember his name.
You don't remember the name of a person who involved you in murder?
now these people are in very high positions.
Ooh, welcome back to Subliminal Jihad, episode 261. I'm your co-host, Dimitri.
I'm Khalid.
And today, we are resuming our 18th installment of The Land Belongs to Whom It Belongs. And I think the last time we had left off was in the 1930s. But today, I guess we are going to jump into a few different aspects of the Arab Revolt proper. And I just hit record because we were talking before.
Yeah, the Arab Revolt of the 30s,
yes,
to distinguish it from the earlier Arab Revolt, yeah.
Right. But I think we were just talking about kind of laying the, telescoping out and surveilling this period of history. And you were making some interesting points about how not really well understood or known, this revolt is. And how critical it is in the whole narrative of leading up to the Nakba and the creation of Israel. Right?
Yeah, well, I mean, this period in general, the book that we kind of want to anchor this episode around is Mahmoud Muharrib's The Jewish Agency in Syria During the Arab Revolt in Palestine, which is a very interesting book that talks about various aspects of this issue, and it's really. I was saying before that the Jewish Agency is really a direct forebear of the institutions of the Israeli state as we know it now. Right. Things like the Mossad, they have their origins in the Jewish Agency and its activity during this time, in the 1930s, and amidst the Arab Revolt and the concern over the Arab national question, mm-hmm. and the issue of Palestinian nationalism and how that related to the other Arab states. And the efforts to kind of undermine Arab solidarity with Palestine that was undertaken by the Jewish Agency. And a lot of people who were working as part of that effort were, first of all, they were also part of transfer committees that were, formed as part of the Jewish Agency, mm-hmm. to, organize or start sort of theory crafting the transfer of Palestinians from Palestine to Syria and Iraq and other places.
Right.
But, that was kind of their design. But also they became a lot of major figures in the Jewish Agency later became big figures in the state of Israel later on.
Right.
Yeah.
In politics, in foreign policy, in the intelligence services, in the military, we have David Ben-Gurion, of course, kind of steps onto the scene in this period in a big way, and who would go on to be the first prime minister of Israel, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And then, of course, Chaim Weizmann, who we talked about many times before, is still, he's still in charge of the World Zionist Organization, in this period, which is obviously working kind of hand in glove with the Jewish Agency. And yeah, you really see in this book, you see the roots of Israeli espionage capabilities and political subversion really start to be planted and blossom a little bit. And, in a way that I think we see all throughout the 20th century, where the Mossad becomes this intelligence agency that punches very far above its weight class relative to its size, right?
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
Yes.
partially due to its, you know, beneficial assistance from the United States, but also to its own, you know, building up its own capacities and its ability to have relations with, you know, both sides of the Cold War and places in Europe and all around the world, you know, certain regimes, many in South America, Taiwan, South Korea, Liberia, places like that, you know, where people like Bruce Rappaport and Robert Maxwell could ply their trades and advance Israeli interests. You know, you could almost say it's something that maybe we might still be dealing with today, as you know, the country argues about the non-existence of the Epstein blackmail files.
Yes.
Right? Like, I mean, this is not something, you know, even aside from the horrible slaughter, which as of this point, July 2025, is still commencing in Gaza. Like, even putting that aside, this is relevant to the United States, you know.
Oh yeah, definitely. And in many ways, like, I mean, I was thinking about like this series a couple of days ago, and we really have like we've been doing this like over the course of, you know, that length of time, right? You know, it's now July 15th, 2025 that we're recording this.
Yeah.
And like so much has happened over the time. And I like when we're recording the show in general, like one of my hopes is that like perhaps, you know, the episodes that we record could eventually be like a resource for like people in the future, like to understand, like, you know, as primary sources to understand this period of time in like the history of the U.S. and this series in particular. I mean, you know, maybe less so our Bigfoot episode, but I hope someone will be able to find use out of that down the line. But, you know, like because this is like a very like pivotal period, I think, or certainly it feels like one from our positionality right now. So like in like America, obviously the United States is like deeply like embroiled in it and is like an indispensable factor of it. And I think like, you know, reflecting like on this history through this time, it's like it's very interesting the resonances that you see and you know, I feel like I'm not making the most eloquent statement to be used by these future people, but you know.
I was thinking actually the exact same thing. I'm really glad you brought it up because I was planning to and forgot. But I was like reflecting on that today where, you know, I believe this is part 18 and, you know, we have at least a few more chapters to go until the creation of Israel, but it has, to the extent that we've sort of commented along the way since October 7th, what was going on at that exact moment. You can hear different, I think, you know, when, you know, Assad in Syria, that'll be kind of relevant today. When he was overthrown about, I guess, 7 or 8 months ago, I think we discussed that a little bit. And there have been these milestones since this war of attrition kind of began. And I mean, I can't say back then if I thought, oh, this is going to be going on like a year and a half from now at this kind of like level of brutality and like intensity and like nothing's going to come in and solve it. Like it seemed pretty horrible from the beginning that we were like strapping in for a long, terrible thing. But even then, I don't know if I necessarily would have predicted that, you know, some would say that we narrowly avoided starting like a third world war last month with Iran, you know, partially related to this piece of real estate in the region, right? You know, Palestine.
Yeah, I mean, I think even if it's like hard to like wrap one's mind around like the like atrocity that we've witnessed, like the genocide that we've witnessed, but I also feel like on some level, like I feel like part of the reason why we are in our 18th part of this and why like we've had this kind of, you know, like almost ascetic like devotion to like continuing this series like through, you know, all these through centuries really is because like there's this like intuitive sense of like the importance of this time and also like the sense of doom around this you know, what we're seeing happening now. Like you know, that feeling of that, like nothing is going to this isn't going to stop, right? Because all the pieces like were in place. Like there was no political will among like the elites in the United States, which really hold all the cards.
Yeah.
Or,
As Trump would
have
say.
shown shown the most leverage and the ability to, maintain like escalation dominance over anyone who could stand up to them.
Mm-hmm.
So it is kind of this sense of like, oh man. And I feel like that's a sense that, you can really like in the context of this episode, you can almost historicize it and see like people kind of like thinking about or like imagining. Certainly, like Zionists were imagining it.
Oh,
Certainly,
yeah.
like you had people like the people in the Jewish Agency, like David Ben Gurion. All these people like Shertak, who was prime minister after him. I don't know if it was immediately after him, but yeah, like
But a big player.
yeah,
He had a vision. These guys had a vision.
They definitely like saw this as like an eventuality that would be realized. I mean, they were unwilling to compromise on and would happen. We are going to get like the Palestinians out of here. Like we are, going to erase these people. Like that was something that they resolved to do and was like a serious commitment of theirs. And people at the time like kind of knew it and had to navigate that problem. And like at one time, maybe it seemed like, okay, like this isn't an inevitability. There wasn't maybe the sense of inevitability, and there shouldn't. I'm not saying that people should feel like true inevitability about this. Like, we should try to do whatever we can to stop it, and to, in whatever way we can, like try to prevent like what they're attempting to do. But it
exactly at this point, we have a U.S. government that seems pretty fanatically in the tank for the equally fanatical government in Israel to keep what it's doing. And it does feel increasingly that there must be an even larger great game kind of involved with all of this, that sort of Israel and Palestine is like a chief pawn in, or, a piece on the chessboard that sort of needs to be preserved at all costs and maybe even to expand, and
there's
take
definitely
take
a desire
territory.
to expand. Yeah. You don't like, at least in this book, you don't like see that ambition as a primary one, I guess, because like, securing like the like core territories, like is, the core like territories in Palestine, like is the main objective.
Right.
But now certainly you see like a desire to expand. And you do see like the idea, like in the activities of the Jewish Agency during this time, you do see like the idea of, well, you see a lot of the same strategies, like in terms of how like relations with the Arab governments and Arab leadership outside of Palestine, and sort of the broader Levant or, former Ottoman Syria, like a lot of the same strategies that we see being applied now, like are employed, but also like you definitely see like the same sort of approach to the Arab leaders and to like the Arab states, as like having sort of a disdain for their sovereignty, seeing them as at best tools and as ultimately enemies whose like, abilities, like they need to be constantly undermined.
Right.
And their like their sovereignty, their organization, like
Right.
their, independence just needs to be constantly undermined.
They need to be constantly undermined. And yet the level of subversive sort of activities that pit them against each other is really kind of staggering once you get into like the prevention of sort of pan-Arab solidarity in the face of external threats, whether it's from Europe or from, the Zionists, like taking over the, the whole region. Like constantly you see like the leaders are not exactly in lockstep to each other, and that's kind of where the espionage thing comes in, because the Jewish Agency starts recruiting even some of these big leaders to act as agents, like for Zionism, like for money, and and also and then convince other Arabs, like make kind of slick persuasive arguments as to like why you shouldn't have solidarity with Palestine. It's like not in your interest actually. This is preventing the the French-Syrian treaty, blah blah blah, and all these things. And then these people would go out in newspapers and in public statements and everything and disseminate these these laundered Zionist talking points. So we're even talking about influence on the media, like being used.
Oh yeah, like to control the
weapon.
press. One thing that I found interesting was that they tried so hard to suppress like the support for the Arab Revolt, the broader Arab Revolt in the Palestinian press, because that would create like an impression of like mutual solidarity among Syrians, for instance, or people in Lebanon, So
Right.
they were like trying to say like, oh, they don't support you. Like, why would you support them? Right. And they were like very,
Right.
very determined that, like this, first of all, that like Palestinians were going to become a minority in Palestine and were going to be transferred and removed. Like they, maybe they didn't say that to everyone who they were talking to, but that was resolved among themselves. And
Yeah.
I mean, even the writer of this book says, like in the conclusion, he says, this research gives an historic background for the Abraham Accord reached lately between Israel and some Arab states and exposes the main Israeli historic objective to normalize its relations with Arab states while oppressing the Palestinians, denying them their national rights, thus revealing that this was deep rooted in the Zionist political thought and practice. So, yeah, I mean, it's definitely true. And you can even see like some like attempts at like bringing Syria into the Abraham Accords, whether that is going to happen in the near term, probably not in the near term, but in the long term, like it's possible. Like, I don't know, like all the Abraham Accords have different like terms. We'll see what happens. Like it doesn't, look, not something to be super optimistic about in general, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think it is interesting because now, we're about like 7 months out from the overthrow of Bashar al-Assad and the rising to power of Ahmed al-Sharaa, right?
Yeah,
his real name.
Also
al-Jalani.
Yeah.
Right.
And like, if he does give up the Golan Heights to Israel, we really should not be calling him al-Jalani. So hopefully he won't do that.
But you've seen like there's so many kind of haunting parallels between reading about the sort of Syrian politics in the 1930s and their struggle to define their own sovereignty, and then like the intense efforts of the Jewish Agency to sort of meddle in Syrian politics in a way that would like guarantee that they would have a maximum like freedom of action like in Palestine, like to sort of separate these two things from one another. And now we're seeing, the sort of anti-US leader of Syria is, forced to flee. This rebel comes in, and, part of the country is already owned by basically like United States proxy force, let's be real. And then, Trump loosens up some of the sanctions for the first time and is kind of dangling, we could normalize relations with you and everything. But like the big subtext more than I think anything is you're going to have to be, there's not going to be a jihad against Israel. All right.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Like there's not going to be, I don't care what your past is, and they can live with that. Like they don't care about Al Qaeda or anything. They took the bounty off his head. But if he wants to go after Israel, oh, no. Like that's a one-way ticket to Coup City, I bet. Or, drone strike city. Like, I mean, they've already demonstrated they killed Nasrallah. They killed multiple Iranian generals last month. Like, they could easily airstrike Jalani.
I'm pretty sure they like
no air defenses.
Actually, like did like like shoot a drone or something like right near like the palace like where he is currently residing. Like I mean. And also like Syria can't like stand like definitely like the threat of just being assassinated like hangs over his head like constantly.
Right.
And
even if you're not afraid of death, it's kind of like this, there's a psychological pressure of like if I want to like stick around and do good or like resist, like, it's like
more than that, like Syria like cannot do anything. These sanctions are like brutal, like Syria will never be able to like stand on its own like 2 feet or to like even like it couldn't mount any kind of resistance to Israel as long as those sanctions are in place. Like that's like, and this like, a big difference and it is interesting because one of the big figures who's talked about is Eliyahu Epstein.
Oh, right.
No relation.
Who
changed his name to Eliyahu Elaf later on, who eventually became like the Israeli ambassador to the US. So he definitely like kind of was there at the very beginning of that sort of relationship, that special relationship that the U.S. now has with Israel. In fact, like he was there like lobbying Harry Truman for that, fateful recognition of Israel, that we talked about way back.
We'll have to dig deep into that in the finale of like, because, in this whole thing, like there isn't really, a Zionist, U.S. kind of formal relationship. Like they're dealing mostly with the British and to a lesser extent the French and with like these Arab governments. But it's like then we come on the scene. And now, like, fast forward, 70 years, and like we're almost going to World War III over
basically
this country.
Like they are like there's no daylight between the U.S. and Israel. It seems like it just seems like we are absolutely in. I mean, what did Trump say about Netanyahu during like the 12-day war, as he coined it?
He might be the best world leader, or no, maybe the best
he
country.
Said like we worked more closely than any team has ever worked before, or something like that. I mean, he may also have said that he's the best world leader of any country, but
I think either he or maybe somebody in the State Department said like Israel is like probably like the best country in the world, like like ahead of America, and it's like. You're like America first. Like, I mean, I'm sorry, but it's like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Like, you guys are such simps. And like, even like a lot of the right winger, like the MAGA people can't handle it. Like, it's too much.
Yeah.
But, that's where this long, journey has taken us into like this folie à deux of imperialistic dominance, like hand in hand with our little brother Israel, down there.
I mean, that's the thing. Like, like I just feel like we are doing this. Like the United States is doing this. Like that's like
even if Epstein had blackmail on everybody, like we're still kind of doing this to our own political like leadership elite class to like control them. You know what I mean? Like to keep them in fucking line.
The way that I make sense of it now is that like, of course people are like, oh, Israel controls the US, which, I think is like not really like the best heuristic. And then people are like, oh, that's like, you got to like, realize that it's the United States that actually like controls Israel, which is certainly more true. But increasingly now I just feel like there's so much integration, which I feel like that's like what Hegseth talked about was like the integration of our allied forces. I just feel like there's shockingly little difference. And I almost feel like these like Israel just has to be looked at as, at this point, like part of the United States, like just, or a colony of the United States or something, because we,
like
Israeli
a semi-autonomous
agenda
state
of our government does not seem to be distinct at all. The only time I can think of it being distinct is when Trump tweeted like, Israel, like stop it, stop bombing now or whatever. Like,
well, he yells at Gavin Newsom too on Twitter, on Truth Social. So he's yelling at like a governor. Like, the U.S. will be kind of on top, but I think it's almost like the Israelis have been sort of deputized to be a kind of a stopgap infrastructure from like American political elites straying too far from like the path that has been kind of like mutually agreed upon of like subduing the world and like preserving our markets and blah, 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 like all the other shit. And like for the Middle East, especially like the petrodollar, everything like that kind of goes all the way up to the top just of like our systemic power and influence. And I could see it kind of being like, I don't know, not to say that any of these elites like from the 90s to today would have necessarily become like badass, like populist renegades and like been able to chart a different path like on their own. But I don't know, maybe for, to get everybody to shut the fuck up about 9/11 and never ask any question about it. Like, having some blackmailed people would help maybe. Or, knowing where like black money flows like go in the world, like the sort of like the centrality of like drug money and things like that into like international finance, like that could be a thing where, and then the Israelis are always like a little bit of like a patsy in a way, because you can, like, if you ever did have to blame anything on them, it's like, oh, those Israelis, they went a little far, they went we don't control them or anything. Like they're their own people, but sometimes they get a little crazy. But I think like in more cases than not, there's like some level of collab going on, and the Israelis wouldn't do something that was like truly against or like inimical to like the sort of ruling class interests and like the imperialist interests of the United States, because that's what sustains them, like their whole existence. Like they can't, like Israel just has like a built-in thing of like America should never go like left wing, like ever. Like we will do like dirty tricks to like help the ruling class.
Like I don't think that Israel really even has like the material leverage to force the US to do anything. Like there's like soft influence in certain ways, like cultural influence. You know, like the perception, for instance, in the media of like Jews are highly intelligent and creative and like brilliant scientists like Einstein and, you know, so funny and, you know, like the carriers of the light of civilization, not to mention the religious connection, you know, with the whole thing of Judeo-Christian values.
Zionist thing.
Right. Yeah. And then also like like Tucker Carlson, you know, saying like the Bible says we have to bless Israel, like, you know, that type of thing. Like, and Tucker Carlson being like, I'm sorry, that's your theology? You think that the state of Israel is you know, like whatever. But
the
like
same country?
But like
he's
it's
not buying it. For whatever reason, he's not buying it now.
Like little like I'm sorry, I'm confused. Like routine is just so funny to me. But like, I mean, even like, are you seriously like pretending to be confused still? But anyway, like,
but like, what about the hard stuff? Like, for example, political blackmail of some kind or something like that. Like where, like, at least towards certain individuals that are like, you know, high up and influential within institutions, they might be able to leverage to some extent beyond just a general soft power.
But like our intelligence community is also like very powerful, and like we would also be able to like manipulate them if like we wanted to. Like that's the thing. Like
I'm sure we do. Like I'm sure, you know, I'm sure we got fed up
spying
like
back and forth. Yeah, we've gotten annoyed.
We don't want Israeli leftists to exist. Like, you know, we don't want like we know that like they call themselves socialists kind of, and they have their little Labor Party, but like Labor Party's kind of been like, you know, deracinated and like weakened heavily, and like it's just such a more like mono right wing kind of country now. Like the Overton window there has just like gradually shifted more and more and more. Not that it wasn't like kind of like there in the founding thing, but I feel like even compared to like 20, 30 years ago, like it's more uniformly kind of on the right, which does, you know, that plays to like their biggest base of support in the US, which is Christian Zionists, you know, who just like love like how
I mean there are probably more Christian Zionists in the US than there are Jews. You know, people like Christians who have like a deep investment in, and like, you know, obviously not all Jews are Zionists, even though like many are. And that's something that like is very like, you know, if you like go to like if you go to a Hebrew school, or you're like, you know, again, just to clarify, you know, like my family background is Jewish. So like, you know, I like obviously I'm Muslim, but like, you know, so like I'm saying this as someone, well, you know, I'm halachically Jewish, or I would be if I didn't follow a different religion.
Right.
But I, you know, I'm an apostate, but the, you know, I don't actually know like what the halachic ruling is about that, but I feel like, you know, like there still is a concept of apostasy. But my point is that I'm not saying this, you know, I'm saying this as someone who's like observed it myself. Like if you go to like a Hebrew school or whatever, like if, you know, that like there's a day like where like people from the IDF like come and like they like talk about how important it, like it's like things like birthright and stuff like that, like all that is like, so we have like a community and it's big. And that's the thing, like, you know, even though there's many more Muslims in the world than there are in like, you know, Jews in the world, there are many fewer Muslims in the world than there are you know, Jews in the US. And whereas
there's less Muslims in the US than there are Jews in the US.
Oh yeah, I don't know what I actually said, but I messed
you
with
said
the
in
words,
the world,
yeah. There's many fewer Muslims in the U.S. than there are Jews in the U.S. Even though there's more Muslims in the world than there are Jews in the world.
And Jews
I don't know.
like,
you might have to edit that to make it make sense.
And Jews came here in like earlier waves of immigration. They're much more established in like the economic and social and political fabric of like the United States. Like there's a relatively successful immigrant group. I mean, like Muslims are like as well, but they're newer. You know,
and not all and. Well, yeah, and it's also just fewer. Yeah, and like there's fewer, you know, like exactly. There's like a lot. Like that's what I was going with the point about like the media representation, you know, like write Yiddish, cast British. It's like that old saying, you know, like that, like like, you know, in industries like Hollywood or whatever, like, and like also in like the media, you have Arabs being portrayed as like barbarians, you know, still to this day, like terrorists, monsters, animals, you know, that is just
I sent you that article about the silent blacklist in Hollywood right now of like anybody that even posts about like supporting Palestine. Like you just won't get work, and that they won't tell you why.
Yeah, and that's a form of like soft power that's like significant. I mean, in that case, it's like, you know, hard power, but like still, you know, the cultural like that matters a lot. Like when you're talking about the average person who, for the most part, doesn't care about this issue, at all, or they either have like some sort of religious investment in it, or they like ambiently know about it and like kind of see it through like what they know from TV. Like obviously, like they're gonna lean towards the Israel side, and that's like like I was talking to my friend who's British, and like in the UK, like it's an interesting like different situation because like whereas in America, like most Americans, like even if they like increasingly don't support what's happening now, like they do like still support Israel and like believe in its right to exist, and et cetera, et cetera. Like, we saw like the sort of meltdown over Zohran Mamdani that became national, was like a national meltdown, which was largely about like his, anti-Zionist politics, profession, like his support for BDS and things like that.
Yeah, getting interrogated by Stephen Colbert.
Yeah,
like
exactly. Like that
minutes.
became like a national like firestorm because like, here, like the average person still like kind of supports Israel. In the UK, that's not the case. Like most people don't like support it. Most people support Palestine, but the government, like we all saw what happened with Jeremy Corbyn, like the government and the media, like is still like really, but like the issue is that they never could like have someone who like never could have like a leader who was actually like anti-Zionist. Well, maybe like in the distant future, like we'll see, but like
in the UK,
the big issue is that they don't have like the power to like go against American foreign policy and to, like they would be like torpedoing their relationship with the US. Like, if they were to like, if you had like a prime minister who's like, you know what? No, like the UK doesn't support this genocide anymore.
That's
like,
a good point.
Like our people don't support it. I was elected not to support, to keep this promise. Like they would be fucked. Like they would be like, they would be like torpedoing like sort of their diplomatic lifeline, which is their relationship with the US. I mean, we saw like what the sort of, the tariff like situation happening with a lot of like the US's close allies. Like just imagine if you had like, for instance, and this is like part of the reason why we have like the sort of lockstep between like Zionism in the UK and like the sort of nationalist right wing, because like there's a demographic issue of like there's a significant percentage of the UK like is Muslim compared to the US.
Oh yeah, much.
And
bigger,
like just imagine one day like a Muslim prime minister.
They already have,
imagine Zohran. Well, they have Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London, which was a whole thing for them. But imagine like a Zohran Mamdani, even someone, I'm not saying that Zohran is like, he's not like, Sinwar or anything, but like even that would be like cataclysmic, for like people in the US, like as, and it almost seems like people have converged, like our political elites have converged around this issue more than ever. Like you even had like Reagan, like kind of pushing back a little bit, describing
H.W. Bush, like, a little bit,
Yeah, like, but now it's even worse than ever, I think. It's like the sort of convergence on it is worse than it's almost ever been.
And I don't know, maybe that is a part of, it's somewhat related to a sense in the United States that we're entering an era of imperial decline and we need to sort of like consolidate all our strongest points on the map and, steel ourselves for like the further rise of China and all these other things. And that maybe it's that kind of like feeling of a desperation and I don't know, also like imperial arrogance that, makes people be like, all right, like we can't fuck around with the Israel thing. We need to back them. Like we need to like teach Iran a lesson. We need to like have this confrontation, and like make sure that Israel, maybe is an even bigger country in the Middle East. And
I mean, also like America like is kind of sliding into fascism,
that too. So
and
there's less to disagree with
violence.
than ever.
It needs like the churning engine of like brutal war and like the exterminate. That's like a certain characteristic of fascism. Whether you want to say like the Italian like invasion of Ethiopia, that war. Like there's a glorification of like, and that is like. If you think about like the characteristics of like the sort of domestic aspects of this kind of creeping, whatever you want to call it. I know people like for a while it was like seen as like a hysterical lib thing to like point out like the fascist elements. But I'm not confining this to Drumpf. I'm saying in general, like it's a bipartisan slide towards fascism.
Absolutely.
And if you look at like the sort of domestic dimension of this, like obviously you have like ICE raids and things like that, but that has been weaponized so aggressively against people who support Palestine, right? People who oppose this violence that really is being done by the US.
Yes, it's a good point to point out that like even if Britain, elected a super left, like, pro-Palestine prime minister, like they can't stop what's happening. Only we are in a position because we're the ones enabling it all to happen at this point. We took over the portfolio from the British, by the end of the 1940s, and it's our responsibility now.
They don't really have an empire anymore.
And same with the EU, like if they could, some of them we might even let some of them like back off on supporting Israel, maybe Trump would probably punish them, but like we're the essential supporter, and like without that, Israel would be in not a great situation and would have to conduct itself very differently with its neighbors than the way it does.
And I think that I think Israel knows that, and that's why like their leadership and their like Hasbaris and like they act afraid a lot. Like the thing that scares them the most is the sense that they are losing like the American like opinion, that they're losing like the like American support. Because I think they know
of the people, have you seen those polls of like, people like under 55, like in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, like going from, back in like 2015, it's like, like by a margin of 10 points, like people in the Democratic Party like supported Israel. Now it's like -50 or something like that. It's like a 70. I think with young people, it's like a 72-point swing in like less than a decade into like people have like a negative view of Israel now. And like even on the Republican side, like there's still more support, but like it's taken a huge hit. And I think your kind of average like person that might get kind of psyoped into like a fascist war mentality, like on the right in the United States, like I haven't necessarily seen them except for the like really like explicitly Zionist kind of neocon ones, like get really excited about the idea of going and like shooting like Palestinians and like killing. There certainly was a lot of that bloodlust like after 9/11, like the big war on terror era, but like there's a lot of exhaustion in the United States with that kind of thing. Trump's, as disingenuous as it was, like his pitch to the voters about being an isolationist and like focusing on America first and stuff was popular, and people actually I think like wanted that. They want us to like disengage from these foreign wars, et cetera, but the elite class is like almost like fanatically all in on it, and like they're not budging. So I mean, it makes sense that they would be a little bit nervous, like somebody like Mamdani even winning the primary in New York without having to back down the way like say AOC or Bernie. I mean Bernie like kind of like they might actually believe what
he had to make like a few concessions maybe, but and like be diplomatic and how he expressed things, but he didn't like disavow BDS, which is like a tangible thing. Like, there was a whole thing where he was like, I'm not going to say that saying globalize the Intifada is necessarily wrong or whatever. He said like some line prepared about how the Holocaust Museum used it. That is meaningful, like again, like I wouldn't like say like pin your hopes like don't set yourself up for disappointment. But that still like is meaningful, and like the fear that it produced in some people is worth observing and is meaningful.
That is a shift of the Overton window that has occurred despite like all of like most of like the American sort of like media apparatuses like great efforts to not allow it to shift. Like whether it's Fox News and like all the legacy media, like as well, like we just said, Hollywood, like pretty much like unspoken blacklist of like anybody that expresses any kind of pro-Palestinian thing, even like, not even in their creative work, but just like on social media or in public at all. Like can't do that, you're fucked. So like you're not going to get like fictional media really that like, shows that perspective. All the news, like left, right, center, whatever, like everybody pro-Trump, anti-Trump, like all of the corporate news outlets are pretty much in the tank for Israel, and like back the Fox News like really fanatically so, but like all those things working against working, even AOC, the great Democratic Socialist like leader of tomorrow, is, you know, like pretty fucking milquetoast on this issue. And like, didn't she still vote for the Iron Dome funding and shit like that? You know, like, you know, Israel has the right to exist. Like, so being able to modify it with like, it has right to exist as a democratic state with equal rights for everybody, like that is a shift. And like nobody in the kind of legacy positions of power like really wanted that to happen. And we're really trying to like build up a dam so that wouldn't spill it. Like the whole Kamala campaign. Remember, it's like, I'm going to handle it. You need to stop. I'm talking now. I'm talking now. You need to sit down. Like, remember that shit?
If you want Donald Trump to win, then say that. If not, I'm speaking. I have like those like the Democrats like during like 2024 like lecturing like, you know, like anti-Zionist protesters and like pro-Palestine protesters and like just Arab voters in general, like are burned into my mind, like Bill Clinton, like, you know, like sort of like soporifically like moaning like a zombie about like the Bible and how like, you know, Jews were there before, you know, Muhammad was born or whatever.
You know, he promised that they would vanquish Amalek.
Yeah, exactly. Like, if you read the
out there.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, are you kidding me? Like, this is the guy who everyone believes when he's like, well, you know, Arafat worked away from the table. You know, it's like, think about like who told you that. Like someone who thinks that, like, you know, who's getting his analysis of the situation from the Bible. From the Old Testament.
Maybe from Jeffrey Epstein. Oh, Jeffrey told me that, you know, we went to the temple and he showed me.
Yeah, exactly. But but yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. Like, we don't like, and in a way, like, it does have to do with the sort of broader, like, American political conversation, like, is very much inflected by this, I feel, because they're like, I was watching, you know, again, like, I hate to be constantly bringing up like stupid, like awful videos I've seen on social media, but I saw like Jack Posobiec. I want to say it was at Turning Point USA. Like, it was one of these like
it was a big thing this weekend. Everyone was arguing about Epstein.
And he was ranting and raving about like who's an American. And he's like, America isn't just like, you know, a country governed by the Constitution or whatever. America is a people. You know, basically, like, it was kind of like this like, sort of
going
racialist.
for the narod concept. What a Polak. He's going for the narod kind of idea of like the people as like a mystical entity. Like,
I guess, although it doesn't really make like, why would like if he be included in like the like what is it like the founding stock, like Anglo, like, you know, Anglo blood like determines like who's an American, like, because he was sort of talking about like, is Zohran Mamdani an American? Of course not. It's like, well, you know, like, is Ilhan Omar an American? Of course not. You know, it's like, what? Like, you know, they're legally like, American.
Everybody called your grandparent,
but
your grandfather, a dumb Polak, Jack. Like, I mean, you're Polish. You're not, you know, you're not a wasp. Like you're not a wasp. Are you pretending? Yeah.
But that is like the thing, because like though like Ilhan Omar and, you know, Zohran Mamdani obviously have something in common. You know, that Jack Posobiec perceives like they're Muslims, right?
Right.
And first of all, like, and this kind of I think is a good segue to this book, because whereas like I think, you know, the like, even though like you see breaks in like the Hasbara effectiveness and like the sort of the psychological operations and like the general population, like, it's been very, very effective at like controlling the discourse within, you know, like the diaspora Jewish community, and, you know, like the like definitely like it's true, like when, you know, you have like
institutional media, like,
exactly, like you have people, you know, like who are gonna like go to bat for Israel because it's been drilled in as something that is crucially important and existential for Jews. Right. But the sad thing is that certainly not all Arabs and not like all Muslims either like care as much about Palestine. Palestinians do, you know,
of course, but
like, it's not being Muslim doesn't guarantee that you will care about Palestine, which is, you know, part of the success of the PSYOP campaign that like began during this period in the 1930s.
Right. Not even being an Arab Muslim state, it guarantees that you're going to like really be there for Palestine.
But the balance, you know, to sort of, you know, I do want to go to the book, but to, you know, the balance may shift. You know, we see like younger Jews like are less like Zionists, you know, are less like in the diaspora, are less like devoted to the idea of Israel than in the past. And
there's a huge age gap, like generation gap going on. Like anybody under like 50 or 50 like basically anybody like under 50, you start to see like a shift occurring. And, not everybody, but I mean, significant. I know a lot of people that are Jewish and, kind of hate Israel.
Yeah.
I mean, like think this is really fucked up.
Definitely.
And definitely. This is all bad.
Leftist Jews in general, like, are some of the most like vociferous anti-Zionists, I feel like, but that's still sadly like a minority within the American Jewish community. And hopefully in the future that may change. And also like, I think what scares Jack Posobiec is that like, there's going to be more Muslims in this country, and not all, there's still like the sort of rifts between and like, Muslims and like among Arabs and among Muslims that have like been cultivated over the centuries. But at a certain point, like there are still, a lot of Muslims who do care and can be mobilized around this issue. And I think that is scary to some people, including him.
I think it's a specific ethnic group that, is coming to America these days where they're perceived to have one issue that is like gonna be almost inherently like a leftist issue, like a left issue that would, even though if like funnily like the Democratic Party is really like not down at all with anti-Zionism, like I guess if it were to find a constituency in either party, it would be in the Demon Rat party. And so Jack Posobiec sees that as like, because I mean, they have a classic inability to like differentiate between like liberal, like Maoist, like subversive, like the one world government, communist, globalist, like it's all just one, DSA person, like Democrat, like it's all the same to them, so he sees like, it's kind of like the argument they'd use about illegal immigration. It's like, well, because these are like Latinos and Haitians coming to the US, like obviously they're all going to vote for Democrats, and stuff because they're not white,
but there's a difference like between Islam and that, obviously, because Islam isn't an ethnic group,
right?
And that's the rub.
It's an ideology.
Remember, like,
it's a religion, but like
and that's I think you hit on the point.
It's believing in something
there when you said it's an ideology,
yeah.
Right? And like that's the thing, like. There were ads on TV in 2016 saying that Donald Trump has promised to ban all Muslims. Like, that is not something that can ever be forgotten. Like, that is like something that is like, that's crazy.
Well, he tried.
Like,
yeah. Right?
Well,
like,
he came up with something that was like a ban of like a bunch of random
countries,
like, Muslim majority countries. Yeah. And I think it ultimately did include some non-Muslim majority countries to say it's like, oh, it's a travel ban because it was like deemed discriminatory, which of course it was. But like, imagine if he had said like ban all Latinos or ban all, which like many in the circle may want to do, or even ban all South Asians or ban all Africans, like.
Yeah,
that would still be maybe a bridge too far.
Well,
but
it's like we brought up
the tip of the spear. First they came, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, I mean, I think the first group that was banned was, I think even in the Ellis Island days, like if you were a like quote unquote communist or anarchist, like I think I remember seeing in like my great grandfather's like intake form at like Ellis Island, it was like anarchist ? And like you basically have to say no or else like you won't get in. It's like, oh, we don't want any. If you're a socialist, anarchist, communist, like get the fuck out. And then after World War II and the Red Scare, I think that was like formalized. I mean, Congress even made it illegal to be like in the Communist Party of the U.S. I think that was like shot down, or like the courts kind of said you can't do that because the First Amendment.
There's definitely like a Red Scare element, like the McCarthyist dimension to what we're seeing now too.
Right.
Like
that was the first
like,
time
communism does come up a lot because it's that thing of like, oh, this is about an ideology that is un-American. It kind of does combine with the issue of like anti-Zionism and BDS. But like the communism is invoked a lot, like Mamdani the commie, for instance.
Oh,
but
the fact that he's like a
examples.
socialist and Muslim is like too much. Like it's their worst nightmare. Like, but it's like we said last time that like after the end of the Cold War, like America, the American like establishment or the elites are like looking around the world, and anybody that like believes in anything is like sus and like a threat potentially, whether it's like, Iran, like the Islamic Republic of Iran, whether it's, Hamas, whether it's the DPRK or North Korea, like people that still hold on to believing in anything in the neoliberal era, where the whole point is that you're like you don't have to believe in anything, and which is the ultimate belief. It's the ultimate ideology, right? Like the ideology of seemingly no ideology because it's so pervasive.
Yeah.
And like anything that is like kind of an existential threat and like something they don't like to see like take off and be popular or successful like around the world. And like for a while, I think after like Eastern European communism was kind of liquidated and vanquished, then they turned to Islamic civilization, where there had been this kind of like political Islam, like different various currents that had sort of developed throughout the 20th century, some of which were maybe seemed to be like strategic tools in very specific areas, like certain, Al Qaeda in the 80s, for example, in Afghanistan, but then others that are like need to probably be subverted and ought to be subverted, because, for example, I mean, if they have the belief in, like an Islamically rooted sense of justice, then maybe they aren't going to let BP come in and buy all their oil for, pennies on the dollar, and they want to nationalize their resources. And, like Gaddafi, for example, who had a sort of eclectic Islamic socialist ideology, who was like, no, I'm going to keep all the oil and then like build things for my own people, and you're going to have to deal with me on fair terms. Fuck you, and like, I'm not going to bow down to you. Maybe I'm going to create my own currency for Africa, and they're like, we have to kill him, like,
yeah, I mean, it's
anything,
true. Like in a way, like this kind of like speaks to the like sort of political like centralization of the issue of Zionism, because in a way it is like the last licit like belief that doesn't have to be grounded in like, means testing or like ROI or something. It just is purely like God like promise this land, or a temple needs to be built. It is based on these like super rational premises, and it's the only such belief that is like allowed, like, because all
right.
like
even through neoliberalism, it's like, nope, this like ancient belief.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Like any other belief is just getting in the like what but come on, like what's more important, like that, or like your own survival, or like your state's solvency,
getting rich,
like what do you care more about, like these
development.
people who are dying, and like your belief in like this cause, or do you care like your morals, or do you care more about your life, or like money, like the money that you need to survive as a country, but
right
yeah, like I and like I had like and I do feel like you see this like in kind of the like the left wing or like anti-Zionist like Twitter discourse like as well, like in that, or like broadly like in all sorts of sectors, not just there, but like when you talk about like the issue of like Christian Zionism, like people are like, oh well, but like at this point, like, do we really need to be like letting Jews off the hook for being Zionists, or like deflecting onto Christians? I mean, it's kind of like a silly debate in a way, like, or like I don't know, like it's not usually constructive, like, but it like in a way, like I mean, maybe it's good to. I was rereading this like sort of what actually is it? It's a like, I'm not sure what the designation of it. It's a treatise, I guess. Mm-hmm. It's called "In Praise of the New Knighthood," or "Ad Milites Templi de Laude Novae Militiae," or Militae, by Saint Bernard of Clairvaux. And this is like it's the Milites Templi are the Knights Templar, right? Okay. This is like a sort of it's like a treatise in praise of them. And, I read this like a while ago, like in graduate school, and it's, a really, it's a striking text, like, and it's sort of bloodthirst, but it's amazing, like how much like the rhetorical notes that are hit are the same ones that you see like in the sort of Zionist discourse now. And this idea is one that like allows for like a convergence, like really like this was incubated in this sort of like crusader mentality, and like it eventually was adopted like by Herzl and all these people, because like it was like a convenience, and it was a viable, like usable idea. But it's
Right.
it's like a nexus. It's this idea. Like it's not about like whether it's like Christians or whether it's Jews or like who do we blame or whatever. It's this idea that is like the problem. Like just listen to this. So
Okay.
he's talking about
before you read that, I'm just gonna grab my coffee in the refrigerator.
Okay,
One
word,
second.
yeah. Starts off like one of, I'm going to skip over this passage, but I'll just read this one part from it where he says, the knight of Christ may strike with confidence and die yet more confidently, for he serves Christ when he strikes and serves himself when he falls. Neither does he bear the sword in vain, for he is God's minister, for the punishment of evildoers and for the praise of the good. If he kills an evildoer, or a malefactor in Latin, he is not, a homicide. He's not a man killer. But if I may so put it, he's a killer of evil. He says a malicide.
Amalekicide.
Yeah, like killing people, like an evil. Like he's not by killing these people. He's not actually killing people. He's killing evil itself. Because he says the Christian glories in the death of the pagan because Christ is glorified. While the death of the Christian gives occasion for the king to show his liberality and rewarding of his knight. And in the one case, the just shall rejoice when he sees justice done. And in the other, man shall say, truly there is a reward for the just. Truly it is God who judges the earth. Yeah, and, he says, I do not mean to say that pagans are to be slaughtered when there is any other way to prevent them from harassing and persecuting the faithful. Again, like you can see the resonance of today, but only that it now seems better to destroy them than that the rod of sinners be lifted over the lot of the just, and the righteous perhaps put forth their hands unto iniquity. So this is like, it is better to like exterminate people. It is better to slaughter the pagans, by which he means Muslims, in like, than that they control this land. Because if they do, then, like he says, he explains it. What then? If it is never permissible for a Christian to strike with a sword, why did the Savior's precursor bid the soldiers to be content with their pay and not rather forbid them to follow this calling? But if it is permitted to all those so destined by God, as is indeed the case provided they have not embraced a higher calling, to whom, I ask, may it be allowed more rightly than to those whose hands and hearts hold for us Sion, the city of our strength, that is Zion. He says it with an S, but... thus, when the transgressors of divine law have been expelled, the righteous nation that keeps the truth may enter in security. Certainly, it is proper that the nations who love war should be scattered, and that those who trouble us, should be cut off, and that all the workers of iniquity should be dispersed from the city of the Lord. They busy themselves to carry away the incalculable riches placed in Jerusalem by the Christian peoples, to profane the holy things and to possess the sanctuary of God as their heritage. Let both swords of the faithful fall upon the necks of the foe, in order to destroy every high thing exalting itself against the knowledge of God, which is the Christian faith, lest the Gentiles should then say, where is their God? Once they have been cast out, he shall return to his heritage and to his house, which aroused his anger in the gospel. Behold, he said, your house is left to you desolate. He had complained through the prophet, I have left my house, I have forsaken my heritage, and he will fulfill that other prophecy. The Lord has ransomed his people and delivered them. They shall come and exult on Mount Zion and rejoice in the good things of the Lord. Rejoice, Jerusalem, and recognize now the time in which you are visited. Be glad and give praise together, waste of Jerusalem, for the Lord has comforted his people. He has ransomed Jerusalem. The Lord has bared his holy arm in the sight of all peoples. O Virgin of Israel, you were fallen, and there was none to raise you up. Arise now and shake off the dust, O Virgin, captive daughter of Zion. Arise, I say, and stand on high. See the happiness which comes to you from your God. You will no longer be referred to as the forsaken one, nor your land any more termed a wilderness. For the Lord takes his delight in you, and your land shall be peopled. Raise your eyes, look about you and see. All these are gathered together and come to you. Here is the help sent to you from the Holy One. Through them is already fulfilled the ancient promise. I will make you the pride of the ages, a joy from generation to generation. You will suck the milk of the nations and be nourished at the breast of their sovereignty. And again, as a mother consoles her children, so will I console you. And in Jerusalem, you will be comforted. And then he talks about how, look how these ancient witnesses foreshadowed the new knighthood. But what I'm saying is, look how all of this foreshadows so much like what's happening now. And I'm not trying to say like it's purely genealogical, like that this is like
the Knights Templar saying it.
Well, it's Bernard of Clairvaux praising the Knights Templar.
Okay.
He's like a doctor of the church, and like a famous, supporter of the Crusades. And he's he's now a saint in Catholicism. But,
naturally, interesting use of the word like Gentiles there, meaning sort of non-Christians. Right. Contra the.
Yeah, that's a good point too, right? Because like there is like, and the sort of idea of like the chosen people will return, and we're gonna like Jerusalem is a wasteland and a wilderness, and we're gonna bring it up and like save it and deliver it through, literally he says like our chosen people. Right.
It's kind of this like fill in the blank Israelite tendency that is like, actually we're the real Jews. Like that, we're the heirs to the Jews. Like,
well, it's basically just look how many times he says the word Zion. Like it's the most like common like biblical word, I think, probably. That he uses like it's Zionism, but it's not Zionism as we know it.
But
it's
if you took out the one line that's like the one true thing of God, which is Christianity, and just deleted the which is Christianity part, then it would be like Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addressing like the IDF like Golani Battalion, before they go into Gaza. Like this would just be like a nationalist Israeli like speech about like your destiny. Like basically.
I mean, it reminds me like of what Sam Harris said, which was that like, not to say that he's like this major, pundit, but I think it's expressive of like a common attitude, where he was saying that like, I've always been an atheist, but I don't know if I'm doing his voice right, but I've come around to say like, that I'm now aggressively a Zionist because I believe that if the Israelis if the Palestinians lay down their guns, there would be peace. If the Israelis lay down their guns, there would be a genocide. And that's exactly the same thing happening here. Like it's better to exterminate them than that the rod of the sinners be lifted over the lot of the just, right? If these people are allowed to be in charge, souls will be lost, right? It's not necessarily like in this case the threat that they're going to kill people, although that's kind of maybe also a concern. But also like people will be seduced over to not believe in Christianity will be in this religion will be in doubt, right? The Gentiles will say where is their God, so it's.
Really stretching it, calling them pagans too. Like this thing that has nothing to do with the Abrahamic tradition, is like out here trying to oppress us Christians, and it's like literally you read the Quran.
It was
like,
pretty common at that time. It was pretty common at the time. Yeah, like
this is the most related religion that it could possibly exist that isn't also Christianity. Like
other than like Arab Christians, they really did not understand what Muslims believed. I mean, there were some people who studied like the Quran like in Latin translation, in places like Spain and things like that, where they had like considerable contact with like Muslims. So there's some who like had a better sense of it, but like a lot of people still thought that like Muslims worshipped like a trinity of like Termagant and Apollyon and like stuff
Muhammad,
like that. Right. Yeah, definitely like the idea that like Muslims don't worship like Mahound is not like widely understood at that time. That was really like rarefied knowledge, but I mean, this guy may have got it a little bit more, but still, like he, they're widely described as widely practice to describe Muslims as pagans, but
right. But the echoes to today are pretty chilling in terms of that mentality. Both of the Israelis themselves and the Zionists themselves, but also their like European and American Christian backers is like kind of seeing yourself like in
is
this.
Shockingly the same, and like like we have the cross that like these like Templars used is like tattooed on the chest of the United States Secretary of Defense. Like, that's not meaningless. But again, there's other aspects to it than simply, this genealogy. So let's go to this book while we this might be a good time to show. But
so just to remind everybody where we are, we were talking about Al-Qassam and how his he ended up shooting a Jewish policeman in a grove. I forget what it was, if it was an olive grove or something like that. And then there was a manhunt, and then the British
that we're
police
talking
cornered
about
him.
Isildin Qasim.
Isildin Qasim, whose name is still around today, and that kind of being seen as like the sort of the spark that lit the powder keg of the Arab Revolt. And I mean, do we want to talk? Because then there was the kind of like real commencing of sort of armed activity, and there's a huge strike, right? Like it might have been a few months after Al-Qassam's death, where like a sort of uprising properly kind of began.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we can actually like start a little bit like before like the Arab Revolt, like it's because the general strike that happened like in 1936, but I feel like we can actually like even go like back a little bit and like kind of like lay the groundwork. I want to like because the Jewish Agency had like started to be active like in its sort of attempts to like manipulate like the Arab national movement like before the Arab Revolt itself broke out, even though it did eventually become like a major focus of theirs and like a major part of like in particular I wanted to like mention some standout figures like from Muharrem's book on page 18. He talks about like the effectiveness of the JA political department increased significantly after 1931 when Chaim Arlo-Sorov became director. Arlo-Sorov, a major Mapai party leader and strategist, expanded the department's espionage and propaganda activities in the Arab countries. In his efforts to build a modern intelligence service, he actively recruited members of the younger generation. Among his finds was a then student in the Hebrew University Department of Oriental Studies named Reuven Zaslansky, later Shiloah, destined to become the first director of Mossad, whom he dispatched to Baghdad for a year in 1931. He also hired Eliyahu Epstein, again, no relation. Later, Elath, who would have a long diplomatic career, including, being the ambassador to the U.S., who was then a graduate student at the American University of Beirut, charging him with spying on Lebanon and Syria and submitting weekly reports on the two countries. Most importantly, Arlo-Sorov appointed Moshe Shertok, later Sharet, as secretary of the political department. After Arlo-Sorov was assassinated in Tel Aviv in 1933, when the bitter rivalry between labor and revisionist Zionism turned deadly, Shertok replaced him. He remained in that position until 1948, when he became foreign minister of the newly formed Jewish state, eventually becoming prime minister in 1954 to 1955. Along with David Ben-Gurion, Shertok formulated and led Zionist policy toward the Arab world throughout the 1930s and 1940s. As head of the Jewish Agency's political department, Shertok continued Arlo-Sorov's policy of recruiting young talent, appointing Eliyahu Epstein head of the department's Middle and Near East division. In 1933, he employed the Damascus-born Eliyahu Sasson, a former journalist fluent in Arabic and well-connected in Syrian and Lebanese press circles, as part of the department's intelligence services. It was Sasson, who later became head of the JA political department's Arab division, who became the principal conduit for articles planted in the Syrian and Lebanese press. In late 1933, Shertok employed Amos Lundman and Aviva Tervalsky, both graduate students at AUB, American University of Beirut, and Tervalsky's choice of the Arab nationalist movement as her thesis topic served as a good cover for her monitoring of Lebanese and Syrian politics. Damn. The two married while in Beirut, and together they formed an espionage cell that remained active for several years. So I wanted to read that part just because it shows like how like many significant figures were involved, like in not only in the Jewish Agency, obviously, but also like in this particular sphere. Like this is like basically where like a bunch of like leading figures in like the Israeli state apparatus cut their teeth, basically, in like psyoping the Arab world.
Psyops,
like director of
espionage.
yeah, and like you can see like the legacy of like this work like today in a very clear way. Like the like intelligence operations that Israel has been able to pull off like in the current conflict. Like it's disheartening like how much like dominance they have in that domain, and they do,
They're very
like,
effective at it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like, and it's a shame, or like it's
But it's
striking
really before they
there's,
had an IDF or a proper government or, proper borders, et cetera, like the sort of nascent intelligence service apparatus was like the core, it was like the original seed from which kind of everything else sprouted from. So it kind of makes sense that like everything, all of like Israeli politics and government would always have this like intelligence thing in the back of their head, as opposed to say like the United States, which, you know, did not actually have like a proper intelligence agency until like World War II, right? And was relatively like late to the game. This is one of those like modern nations where like right out the gate they have like a very robust like intelligence apparatus, and you know, I'm eventually paramilitary apparatuses as well. But yeah, it's kind of like they're for the first arrow in their quiver that they have.
Yeah. So yeah, like even before like the Arab Revolt took off, they had like cultivated like a lot of contacts in like the Arab national movements, and you know they were able to like, you know, there's a good kind of, he has some very good like bullet lists in here where he talks about like, you know, the sort of goals that, you know, the senior figures in the intelligence service you know, had stipulated, and the sort of conducting negotiations with the leaders of the national bloc in Syria, which is kind of an interesting, you know, organization to talk about in a bit. But their goals were to stop the varied and highly significant support provided by Syria and its national forces to the Palestine Revolution, to create a rift between the national bloc in Syria and the Palestinian national movement, to obtain the support of the leaders of the national bloc and other Syrian elites for the establishment of a Jewish national home in Palestine, to create common interests between the Jewish agency and the leaders of the national bloc, to deny or marginalize the national rights of the Palestinian people and branding the Palestinian national movement as extremist and terrorist, and to solve the Palestinian issue within the framework of a comprehensive Jewish-Arab agreement between the Jewish agency and the Arab nationalist movement led by the national bloc behind the back of the Palestinians and at their expense. So
up to today, that's kind of like,
well, yeah,
in
exactly.
a way, their strategy.
I was about to make the exact same point that like these are the same things. This is like kind of like the stipulations that you see Israel trying to give to Syria now. Like you need to like crack down on any kind of like, you know, Palestinian like resistance like happens in Syria. Yeah, exactly.
So I mean, they were making these moves even before kind of 1936 really pops off. So, you know, they have contacts, and then
and this was like, you know, to like they like part of the like the broader, you know, revolutions happening now are like, you know, the sort of resistance in Syria to like the French mandate, right? So that is like part of this like broader situation, right? Like so the like revolt in Palestine is like, you know, one thing that is like a huge concern for Zionists, obviously. But there's also like the happening against the background is like, you know, the fall of like King Faisal and everything.
Yeah. There's this section here. The Syrian National Bloc turns to the Jewish Agency for help, which says, from the beginning of the 1930s, the National Bloc led the struggle of the Syrian people against the French mandate until Syria gained independence. When it was founded, it sought to unite all political actors and frameworks under its umbrella, but failed because of a number of radical Syrian parties who did not join its ranks. Opposition to the National Bloc in Syria crystallized under the leadership of Abdelrahman al-Shabandar, especially after his return to Syria in May 1937, when he was pardoned by the French Mandate authorities. However, the National Bloc in Syria remained the broadest, most popular, largest, and most geographically widespread Syrian political grouping, and the most diverse in the class makeup of its masses and supporters. So it had a constitution approved in 1932, which defined its goal as being to liberate the Syrian lands formerly part of the Ottoman Empire from all foreign authority, bring them to full independence and full sovereignty, and gather their fragmented territories into a state with one government. In its first few years, the National Bloc adopted a policy of honest cooperation with France in its pursuit of independence through peaceful political means, mass struggle, and direct negotiations with the French Mandate authorities in Syria and the French government, avoiding violent confrontation and armed struggle. From time to time, it organized protest demonstrations and general strikes against the French Mandate authorities, but these did not take a violent turn. In the mid-1930s, the National Bloc escalated its peaceful political and mass struggle and demanded independence, whereby the mandate would be turned into a Syrian-French treaty of friendship and alliance, similar to the Iraqi-British Treaty of 1930. In March 1936, a Syrian delegation from the National Bloc traveled to Paris to negotiate with the French. Immediately after Léon Blum formed the Popular Front government in June 1936, following the fall of Albert Sarraut's government, negotiations between the French and Syrian parties moved forward. In September 1936, the Treaty of Friendship and Alliance was signed, which stipulated a 3-year transitional period during which the responsibilities of the Mandate Authority would be transferred to the Syrian government. Then they had elections. The National Bloc won a landslide victory. A government headed by Jamil Mardam was formed, and the parliament elected Hashim al-Attasi as president of Syria. But then in December 1936, the Syrian parliament ratified the treaty, but the French parliament refused to follow suit. The Mardam government continued to exert efforts over the following 2 years to push the French parliament to ratify the treaty and put it into effect, but to no avail. In its national charter, issued in January 1936, the National Bloc pledged to reject the Balfour Declaration, to resist the Jewish national homeland in Palestine, and to strive to bring about the unification of Arab countries. When the Arab Revolt erupted, the Syrian National Bloc was dealing with its own domestic issues and its own struggle for Syrian independence. So it says again, when the Arab Revolt erupted in Palestine in 1936, several important questions faced the leadership of the Syrian National Bloc at a decisive period in its struggle for Syrian independence. And he lists some interesting questions here. Would the National Bloc support the Arab Revolt in its struggle against the Jewish national homeland in Palestine and the entire Zionist movement in accord with its stance against the Balfour Declaration, etc.? Would it take a neutral stand? Would it take a neutral stance and refrain from providing support and backing to the Arab Revolt for fear of the effect the support would have on the positions of Britain, France, the Zionist movement, and, quote, world Jewry on Syria's independence? Would the National Bloc oppose the Syrian people and their national forces providing support to the Arab Revolt in Palestine? That's an important one. How did the National Bloc understand the relationship between the Syrian national struggle for independence and the Palestinian national struggle against Zionism and British colonialism? What was the position of the National Bloc on the Palestinian national movement and the continuation of the Arab Revolt? Should it be treated as an ally, or would the continuation of the revolt inhibit the National Bloc in its pursuit of independence? And this one's important. Were the Zionist movement and the JA enemies that had to be resisted, or should they be negotiated with in order to achieve Syrian independence? Did negotiating with the JA really serve the struggle for Syria's independence? Was the Palestinian issue a card that could be used in the struggle of the National Bloc to achieve Syrian independence? And we'll see answers to some of those questions.
That part about like quote unquote world Jewry is kind of important. And this author does point out that like kind of like the idea that like the Jews controlled the world like did like inflect this like in a lot of these like National Bloc leaders kind of like subscribe to that, and like they definitely like had kind of this sort of double-sided like anti-Semitic like idea where like they believe that because like the Jews are so influential and powerful,
you have to
negotiate. If they help them, then they could they that would be great to be their allies. They would have all this like they basically in their minds like we're controlling Europe and everything.
Right.
Like so
it's kind of like Rocco's Basilisk, but for the state of Israel, where if you help us build it, like we'll be nice to you because we control everything. But it's an interesting kind of thing. Like the people that were more open to negotiating were often like had this inflated view of like Jews controlling everything, and like thus you must like that. Like they have a lot of pull. Like Léon Blum, for example, the French prime minister, was a Jewish socialist. Who got elected in 1936, and I think this book says that there's a lot of perception in the Arab world that like if you could influence him favorably with the Syria situation, like maybe if you were more conciliatory to the Zionist movement, that then Léon Blum would get the parliament to pass the Syria French friendship treaty. You know what I mean? Like, which it didn't end up exactly.
I mean,
they were overstating the power that like the Jews had to like really decisively whisper into the ears of all these European leaders and like get them to do this or that. Though the Zionists were influential, especially probably in Britain, I would say. they definitely had a sympathetic ear there, but even then, like
although
they kind of had to work for it.
did like face like even throughout this period, like there was fear that like Britain would like slide over to favoring the Arab side, probably from again, you had to take into account their perspective. So like from their point of view, like favoring the Arab side could be like, still significantly favoring the Zionist side. But, they definitely did like, they definitely didn't feel that to be the case. They felt that, they still like weren't like able to be sure of, and that was like, a consistent theme, right? That they like felt that they were being ill served by the British mandate, and there was even Zionist terrorism against the mandate authorities and things like that. So,
which I feel like Zionists will even bring up today. I think I saw somebody say that actually the like Israelis are like an anti-colonial struggle movement because they did like terrorism against the British, and like actually they're decolonial, and like how could you not support these
this
decolonials?
This is the best decolonial movement like of all time. It's like, all right, buddy.
But there was a complicated thing where they definitely had a lot of support like in the British government, but at the same time the British were juggling a lot of different things at that time. Like there was the rising threat of Germany. World War II is kind of on the horizon. They had to sort of lock down a lot of their like colonial resources, and the oil in Iraq was very important. So there was a kind of a sense that like, well, like, yeah, sure. Like in a kind of normal environment, maybe they would favor the Zionists, like, extreme geopolitical exigencies could occur that cause them to kind of like tip the scales a little bit more, to giving the Arabs more to keep them on side or something like that. And when you read through like the narratives of like the Peel Commission, which kind of comes, I think, in the middle, it's kind of like the halftime of the 30s Arab Revolt, because there's kind of two main phases or like explosions of it, which ultimately, was called which produced the white paper, which I think or the white letter, which the Palestinian paper is called the black paper, or the black letter, for its perceived like generosity. It was the one that first proposed partition. But anyways, you could see that like the Zionists were like working overtime to really put on a performance and like make their case as kind of persuasive as possible, because they weren't exactly sure that, the whole of the British government would kind of go along with backing them. And in their view, like some of the Zionists felt like they didn't back them hard enough, and that was like outrageous and blah, blah, blah. So, it really depends on what side of the issue you're looking at it on, in terms of like who were the British really like, in the tank for. Yeah. Right.
One thing though that like is definitely not like up for debate, or like depends on your perspective, is like you still often hear like now like this idea like in the sessions of the Nakba, I heard it like a million times like from people like, because it's one of those talking points, it's I can imagine David Simon bringing it up, although I think that he, was focused more on the Mufti or whatever. But, when talking about the Nakba, it's always the idea that like the Arabs attacked and tried to crush baby Israel that was just trying to form itself. And then like they got what was coming to them, and Israel won against the odds or whatever. But like, and, I've even heard like the Palestinians were invited, they left. They were invited to go, and they, because they wanted to go behind like the lines of the invading Arab armies that were trying to crush poor baby Israel. But like, even if you are like a hardcore like Zionist and you believe like in, the like that this is all justified or whatever, you like that is like a complete alternate reality, because like, well, I mean, of course, it's a complete alternate reality that Palestinians willingly left their homes. So I don't even know why I had to say that. But like, I think this is an important point to like, in case you come across that idea, or, I've ever heard it, it's, I mean, we've kind of seen how this, like the idea had already really taken like firm shape significantly before even the 1930s. But the very people who were like negotiating with the National Bloc, this author emphasizes, like during this period, this decade, the Jewish Agency formed 3 transfer committees to develop operational plans for the transfer of Palestinians to Arab states. The first in 1937, the second in 1942, and the third in 1948. Ironically, the JA representatives who conducted formal negotiations with the National Bloc, all of whom shrouded Zionism as a blessing for Palestinians, right? This is like the same thing we talked about before.
There's a reason for that for some of them.
Yeah. were important members of these transfer committees. Eliyahu Epstein was Secretary General of the first transfer committee. He himself made plans to transfer the Palestinians to the Jazeera region of Syria after he visited the region at the request of the first transfer committee and submitted an extensive report to the committee. Eliyahu Sasson, Dov Hawes, David Hakohen, and Joseph Navani were also important members of the transfer committees. It goes without saying that these three transfer committees were secret at the time, and the leaders of the National Bloc and other Syrian elites had no knowledge of them, or the fact that the JA representatives they met with were important members of the committee to transfer the Palestinians. But they were. And now, it is known.
So it wasn't an ad hoc idea that they just suddenly came up with and sort of accidentally took all that land when they attacked them.
Exactly. And then, and then it retroactively became justified because I don't know, but yes.
Yeah, apparently if somebody attacks you first, you can steal all their land and colonize them and destroy them forever, I guess. That's apparently that's the rules of the playground.
Yes, but that did not happen. So, or, there obviously was a conflict that happened, but it was spurred by a deliberate plan that was enacted during this period of time and before to ethnically cleanse Palestine.
Right. And there was resistance to this, these plans, to the extent that they were known and understood at the time, or even suspected at the time.
And it was understood that there would be resistance, because it was
the
something
British know this. The British are pretty clear in their colonial documents that that's one of the things they're worried about is that people are gonna fight,
exactly,
this
they're
isn't gonna
not
be peaceful.
Why would they go along with this? Exactly. And I think that, of course, the Zionist Jewish agency knew this as well. They knew that they needed to start figuring out a way to kind of manufacture consent for this in the Arab world, or figure out a way to
or simultaneously to sow division so that people are not united in their opposition to the establishment
insofar as possible. Obviously full consent would not be able to be manufactured, but to manipulate the situation to give themselves whatever advantage they could.
And unfortunately, you do see during the Arab Revolt, kind of in the final analysis, I found this interesting book. It might be next time, might be better to dig more into it. Britain's Pacification of Palestine, which is mostly about the kind of second part of the second phase of the Arab Revolt, where the British launched a pretty vicious counterinsurgency campaign and sort of militarily crushed the revolt, but. In the early parts of this book, it's interesting. He quotes a lot. He paraphrases and quotes a lot from Mao's writings about guerrilla warfare to sort of explain why it was in a way kind of doomed to fail, as a rural, using kind of Mao's categories of and concepts of how rural peasant-based insurgencies develop, and sort of the the overlap, without kind of unified political leadership. I think Thomas Sankara also said something similar in the 80s about a person without a soldier without political education is a potential criminal, or a gangster or something like that. Without any kind of political or ideological orientation, uprisings like this tend to be a little bit chaotic and all over the place. And that was one reason why the British were ultimately, through a variety of methods, were able to kind of quash it. And but the revolt, it was a mass revolt of the general population, and it did have some leader. I mean, obviously Al-Qassam was killed in the beginning. Perhaps things would have been a little different because he kind of did have a unifying ideology. And it's interesting now, throughout the 20th century into the 21st, you definitely see, I think they've kind of fixed that issue a little bit in terms of, we have, an ideology and, a program and a goal, very, very disciplined. The Al-Qassam brigades that are named after him obviously have a very, tight organization and discipline, both ideological and just, tactical discipline, right? But this is the first opportunity to sort of try out just revolting in a kind of broad-based way. And yeah, this book kind of makes the argument. It's mostly like studying like the sort of the counterinsurgency operations. It says here, this is a little bit interesting. It says that the revolt in Palestine was a hybrid insurgency. Rebels employed some unorthodox guerrilla war methods, and they built proto-guerrilla base areas, such as around the towns of Jenin, Nablus, Tulkarm, what the British called the Triangle of Terror, and the Palestinians Fire Mountain, Jabal al-Nar, with their own taxes and revolutionary Sharia courts. But they never developed these into safe base areas, such as Mao Zedong's one in Shanxi region in China after the 1935 Long March. When the British lost control of southern Palestine in 1938 to the rebels, it was not to a new revolutionary order, but to anarchy. In Mao's seminal revolutionary thinking, the fundamental issues for insurgents were political and social, and once revolutionary cadres had sufficiently mobilized local people, a temporary guerrilla area would become a permanent revolutionary base area that would spread like an oil stain. The issue, though, was organization. Palestinian rebels eschewed sustained politicized guerrilla war to create such base areas in favor of a roving style of fighting that Mao, for one, argued needed to be, quote, thoroughly eradicated if guerrillas were to win. In fact, Palestinian rebel forces were more parochial than roving, stuck to local clan territory and unwilling to combine to spread the rebellion. Moreover, as with Pancho Villa's revolutionaries in northern Mexico after 1910, Palestine's rebels had no concrete progressive social aspirations to fire up the peasantry, so it was a case of every man for himself, in quotes, in contrast to Emiliano Zapata's insurgency in southern Mexico, where peasants supported the rebels' fight for land reform right up to the Zapatista guerrillas in action today. The Palestinians were not guerrillas in the style of their peasant contemporaries in China, where guerrillas built rebel base areas and successfully matched protracted irregular warfare to severe discipline, grassroots political activism, and codified revolutionary thought attuned to rural societies before building regular armies to win set-piece battles, as with the Vietnamese victory at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu in 1954 against the French. China, with its peasant-based insurgency, is an instructive parallel case study to Palestine, even if local circumstances might vary. For example, rebels could hide in the roadless, hilly terrain of the West Bank in Galilee, but they never had the secure fastness of China's vast interior spaces. Palestine's 10,434 square miles covered an area not much bigger than Wales, and the British built new roads, Tegart and frontier forts, and border fences to reduce rebel zones. While regimental journals commented on the harsh tactical terrain where soldiers lost touch with comrades just 5 yards away and others fainted from heat stroke, rebels in Palestine had no deep strategic maneuver space within the country. This book frames Palestinian rebels as a movement and not an organization, one that was parochial in form at the start of the revolt and had fragmented by late 1938, and which never reached up to be a vanguard or integrated movement with robust rather than fragile central and local command structures. Of the four ascending phases of Maoist revolutionary war, from organization through terrorism and rural guerrilla war to full-scale mobile war, the rebels in Palestine never moved far into the third phase and arguably never beyond the second one of terrorism, and they even lacked the good organization that was the jumping-off point for any insurrection. Just 4 days after the revolt started, some of its, quote, lukewarm Palestinian leaders were already urging an end to the violence so that they could accept an official invitation to go to London to discuss a legislative council offer cleverly made by the British in December 1935 to prevent trouble after al-Qassam's death. Such organization as existed in the Arab Revolt followed violence and not vice versa, as with Latin American revolutionary Folkismo in the 1960s, but without its foundational radical political ideology built on the Cuban insurgency of guerrilla action, substituting for the vanguard party, and Folkismo also failed. The Palestinians never organized effectively, whether as revolutionary communist force in the style of Mao's guerrillas, as conservative nationalists as AOKA did in Cyprus, as urban guerrillas in the mold of the IRA or ETA, as Castro Guevara, revolutionary chic, or religiously as with Islamic State today. It might have been different if al-Qassam had lived. His followers furnished many of the most committed, effective rebel band commuters in the revolt. Other rebel leaders who impressively organized and mobilized, such as Fawzi al-Kawukji, or Fawzi Bey, right, rated highly by British soldiers and supported by the Fellahin, either served only intermittently in Palestine, in al-Qawuqji's case for just 2 months in 1936, or as with Fakhri Abd al-Hadi, switched sides and later fought for the British. Some Palestinians, notably Haj Amin al-Husseini, argued that al-Qawuqji was a British spy, and the RAF flew in a, quote, payment to al-Qawuqji when he left the country in a convoy of British vehicles that passed through Transjordan in November 1936. The payment and the British trucks formed part of a deal to get al-Qawuqji and his men out of Palestine so that the October 12, 1936 ceasefire could go into effect, as readers can discover in Appendix G. The point here is that Haj Amin's divisive gossip highlights Palestinian disunity. Yeah, so he goes on to like describe what like the both sides, studying both sides in this book of the conflict and stuff. But it's something we'll see in this other book about, you know, the Jewish agency in Syria, of the ability to subvert and recruit spies to undermine this effort, which already was a little inchoate and not tightly organized in the way that that it would be in later decades. I think, like from experience, they would realize that, you know, whether it was the PLO or, you know, Hamas after that, the PFLP, these various groups would, I don't know, develop more. But this was kind of, you know, this was a reaction to like a variety of trends and circumstances that were, you know, accelerating throughout the 1930s. And, you know, it started with these kind of tit for tat shootings, right? Like several months, in the several months following Al-Qassam's death, where, what was the name of there was the Anabtba shooting, or the Tulkarm shooting in 1936, where two Jews were shot. And then there was retaliation the next day where Arabs, there were 2 Arabs killed in Petah Tikva, and, you know, kind of arguing back and forth. I think the sort of the Zionist like press said that like the killing of the Arabs was done by like an Arab brigand who, you know, had just been turning in people, like other Arabs, to the police. So he clearly like wasn't loyal to Arabs, and like he must have done it. And a lot of confusion and stuff. And then these like kind of tit for tat, like sectarian killings just start to like, you know, happen with more, you know, regularity. I think the numbers are not like crazy, you know, in the first few months, but it's like, I think maybe about 30 people in the first month die, and like, you know, 20 people the next month, 15 the next month. So there's this steady uptick in, you know, intercommunal violence and like sort of like vigilante activity. And, you know, it does escalate from there. But, you know, you have, I think we talked before in the Mufti episode about how like really that lack of unity, like you saw with Haj Amin al-Husseini, and what was it, like his rival family, the Nashashibis, right? You know, like the al-Husseinis and the Nashashibis were like wealthy kind of merchant families that had a tendency to, they were both involved in politics and tended to like beef with each other. And then, you know, even in Syria, you have kind of the national bloc, and then you have like the opposition, which is allied with, correct me if I'm wrong, with King Abdullah in Iraq at this point, right? Or they support him becoming the king of Syria eventually, like as opposed to the National Front.
I think that the National Bloc, I'm not sure if you're thinking, I think the National Bloc, who were you saying supports King?
I was saying that the opposition to the National Bloc was in support of King, I believe it's King Abdullah, who was then the king of Iraq, like eventually expanding like sort of his rule to like incorporating Syria into like a broader kingdom, or at least becoming like the ceremonial ruler. Whereas the National Bloc was focused more on like a Republican, like parliamentary government and being like a singular nation state.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there was a Shabandari opposition. I don't remember
I think that's who...
if they, like what their like alternative was. Maybe that was what it was. Maybe they were talking about, it wasn't King Abdullah who was king of Iraq at the time, right?
It was Faisal. It was Faisal. Yeah.
So and he had like been removed like, you know, like a decade or so ago, and then the French like kind of came in and took over, and then they, you know, were revolted against. But I don't remember if the Shabandari opposition had wanted to restore him. Was that like what their plan was?
I'm pretty sure I read that in the Jewish Agency book at one point, that they were kind of generally in support of, I don't know if that was kind of like their main thing, but they wanted kind of, like a kind of federated kingdom kind of thing, as opposed to the national bloc, which wanted to, let me see if I can find it here, because Chaim Weizmann met with King Faisal. They'd kind of been working with Faisal, both spying on him and paying him money throughout the 1920s and 30s.
Yeah, and the Jewish Agency cultivated relationships with both the opposition and the national bloc.
Exactly.
But I don't recall if they had, I mean, they did meet with Chaim Weizmann, who was like kind of a patron of Faisal at one point. But I don't recall I thought they were just kind of opposed to the nationalist government. I assumed they just, wanted to seize power for themselves, but I don't remember. Maybe you're right. I'm not sure if they wanted to restore a monarchy or have one. I don't.
I read that, but that does kind of lead us. Do we want to talk about Nasib al-Bakri? His story.
That would be good.
He's a good story, like an example of like what happened.
Oh wait, well let's talk about Fakhri al-Barudi a little bit first.
Fakhri al-Barudi, okay.
Yeah, this kind of goes back a little bit before the revolt itself, but they started to kind of cultivate. I think this is a good example of the relationships with the National Bloc. And the National Bloc, they're not the same as it's kind of interesting because they're not really equivalent with the SSNP, which you all may know from sponsoring Tulsi's visit to Syria way back. But I think the SSNP was more radical even at this time, but they were kind of similar. And this book even mentions that al-Barudi was the leader of this sort of youth organization called the Iron Shirts.
I saw
which
that,
was very deliberately meant to be kind of on the model of the brown shirts and the black shirts. And even the brown shirts themselves, so
many such cases, the silver shirts in America.
So it so Mussolini and Hitler definitely had their admirers, as you can kind of see in the SSNP's totally not a swastika logo. It's a complete coincidence. They were admired as strong state builders, and probably the anti-Semitism definitely had some currency in the Arab world this time, so that probably didn't hurt either.
Definitely.
But he was definitely willing to. Barudi, interestingly, was willing to talk with Eliyahu Epstein because part of the reason was that he had this idea of the power of the Jews, right? So he writes, in June 1936, the JA's political department discussed the policy required in the region given the expansion of the revolt in Palestine and developments in Syria. One of the decisions taken was to seek to establish relations with the National Bloc in Syria with the aim of stopping or reducing the various forms of Syrian support for the Arab Revolt. Besides this, the JA feared the struggle of the Syrian people, led by the National Bloc, would lead to full or nearly full independence for Syria, and that Syria could conclude a treaty with France along the lines of the treaty that existed between Iraq and Britain, which would strengthen Syria's own capabilities and increase the possibility of its support for the Palestinian people. Ain't nothing new. Acting on the instructions of Shertak, Epstein and his delegation traveled to Damascus in 1936 to make contact with the National Bloc and meet with its leadership. Epstein visited his former guest, Fakhri al-Barudi, who he had met with in 1935, with the aim of organizing an official meeting with the National Bloc in Syria. Before discussing what happened in these meetings between representatives of the JA and leaders of the National Bloc, it is important to note that the JA representatives in these meetings were strong adherents of the Zionist project and its aim to establish a Jewish national home in Palestine, and attempted at the same time to give this project a benign face and claim that it did not harm the Palestinians, right? We talked about this a little before. This is actually from the same paragraph that I read earlier. But so, Eliyahu Epstein was meeting with him, was the Secretary General of the First Transfer Committee, as we talked about. So he met with him in Duma that is Fakhri al-Barudi, the leader of the National Bloc, in July 1936. Near Damascus, in the presence of Amos Ludman and David Lauzia. The two sides discussed the situation in Palestine and Syria and the prospects of reaching a peace agreement between the Jewish Agency and the Arab nationalist movement. Epstein told al-Barudi that the Zionist project did not harm the Palestinian people, but on the contrary would benefit them. Epstein denied the cause of the Arab Revolt was the damage the Zionist project was inflicting on the Palestinian people and the threat it posed to their existence. He stressed that the JA was committed to continuing Jewish immigration to Palestine and categorically refused to stop or reduce it. The acquisition of Palestinian lands by the JA would not lead to the uprooting of the Fellahin, Epstein claimed. On Arab nationalism and Syrian independence, Epstein said that Zionism supported the Arabs' national aspirations and those of the Syrians in particular. He pointed out that the Syrians were on the threshold of independence, and that strengthening independence, once it was gained, would require material and technical strength and good relations with Syria's neighbors. They're like, it's almost too much.
You can hear them like saying this to countries today of like, come on,
it's exactly
just,
the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
The Zionist movement was ready, he asserted, to assist the Arab nationalist movement to enhance the independence of the Arab states. He also claimed the Zionist movement did not conflict with or harm Arab national interests, and that the Arabs did not appreciate the importance of the Zionist movement in developing the Mashriq and the great benefit they could gain from the prospering of Zionism, blaming Syrian Arab nationalists for failing to understand this. Throughout his discussion with Epstein, not once did Fakhri al-Barudi allude to the prevalent view that the Zionist movement was a colonial settler enemy foreign to the region, and that it was seeking through immigration and settlement to establish its presence and alliance with the colonial powers at the expense of the existence of the Palestinian people. He shared Epstein's thoughts on the great benefit that the entire Arab people might gain if it cooperated with the quote-unquote Jewish people. The Arab national movement, he added, had not yet matured enough to comprehend these matters or take a position on them according to its interest, and not according to existing contradictions. Al-Barudi digressed to Epstein. Do not forget that you have been thinking about the Zionist project for 2 millennia, so it is no wonder that you have a program with a long-term vision with clear milestones on the path. Yeah. Al-Barudi suggested to Epstein that Zionism clearly signaled its good intentions toward the Arabs in order to gain their trust. The Arabs were aware of the Jews' power in the world and did not underestimate it, he added. Yeah, this is exactly what I mean. You control half the international press, or 2/3 of it. Try to make this press serve our interests as well as your own, and try to use your great influence in European and American circles to our advantage and yours. One should add that such misconceptions and partial information about Judaism and Zionism was not unique to Barudi, blah, 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 he goes on. But so, yeah, and he says that, you've been oriented toward the West, but like, why don't you like team up with us and orient yourself towards us? And, this will, like, we can work something out. And like, our children will learn Hebrew and your children will learn Arabic. Al-Barudi added that what he said he could not repeat to his wife or his best friend, because they would be unable to understand it due to their upbringing.
What did he say?
Well, just like the idea that like we will cooperate, with
friends.
you, and that you will help us, and like people, people don't understand, they can't see what their interests are, not even my own wife or my best friend.
This is actually interesting. What he says is he says, on the revolt in Palestine, I have done everything I can to ensure that the situation in Palestine does not worsen. Thousands of young Syrians wish to go to Palestine to help their brothers, and we stop them. We have also obstructed arms smuggling. You should know that arms smuggling to Palestine is only carried out to make money, not for nationalist motives. We have stopped the smuggling of weapons driven by nationalist motives. So, I know obviously he's not showing all his cards here, but that's an indication as well that, some of these politicians in neighboring countries like Syria are to some extent, I actually don't know if low-key he was like really supporting the revolt, or if he was like, if he's just saying this, or it's funny that like we only like smuggle arms for money. Like we don't care about it. It's like we would never do that for nationalist motives, but like,
well, this kind of illuminates that a little bit, what follows. Al-Barudi touched on the issue of stopping the Arab Revolt and the role of mediator between the Palestinian National Movement and the Jewish Agency that he hoped the Syrian National Bloc would play. He stressed that there is no power in the world that can stop the Arab Revolt without meeting preconditions, adding, the key to stopping the revolt in Palestine is in your hands. Stopping Jewish immigration to Palestine. Stopping it for a certain period of time will enable us to approach the Palestinian leadership and prepare the ground for an agreement between you. Epstein's response was clear when he said that the JA would never agree to a halt to Jewish immigration to Palestine or even a temporary moratorium. Al-Baroudi replied that without a halt to immigration, it would be impossible to discuss an agreement between Arabs and Jews in Palestine. The demand that Jewish immigration cease was the most important demand of the Arab Revolt in Palestine, and the Palestinians would not end it without an end to Jewish immigration. He added, "If you give me a hint that you are ready to accept this condition, then I and many national bloc leaders in Syria, such as Shukri al-Kulwatli, who eventually was targeted by an assassination attempt by Zionist agencies, Lufti al-Hafar, and others, will urge the Palestinian leadership to negotiate with you. Otherwise, we will not accept any role in this issue." Epstein suggested that al-Baroudi address the issue of Arab-Jewish relations in Palestine not through the Arab Revolt in Palestine and the Palestinian National Movement's demand for an end to Jewish immigration in Palestine, but rather through dealing with and studying all aspects of Arab-Jewish relations in Palestine. Al-Baroudi promised to think about the subject from the angle Epstein proposed and said he would inform the leadership of the National Bloc about the discussions and propose a meeting between the National Bloc and the Jewish Agency to conduct a comprehensive and radical dialogue between the two parties regarding all aspects of Arab-Jewish relations. I don't even know what that means. Like, I guess it means like, well, hey, like, what? I don't get it.
Like throw a Psytrance festival. And,
exactly. Like, well, we have a
Psytrance. Yeah, this is Rick Doblin, the seed of Rick Doblin's dream.
Yeah, but I mean, it kind of like goes like to go back a little bit to his whole thing about how I can't even tell my wife, that like I, agree with you or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's this kind of thing of like the Syrian people, like it's still like the sentiment is like very much like on the side of the Palestinians, I would say.
Oh yeah.
I remember even like maybe you saw this, like it was an interview that was done, like it was like a I feel like it was like a Ramadan, like, like sort of game show type of thing or like interview segment. Like it was like orphans, who were being fed at some kind of like, benefit or something in Idlib, before like the overthrow of Assad. And this interviewer kind of like, he was like this like telegenic kind of like, almost like one of these TikToker guys who like go on the street with a microphone or whatever, almost like the Idlib equivalent of that. And he goes up to like these young girls, and they're like these orphans, like these young girls, and he's like, "Hi," and he's like talking to them, and he's like, "Oh, you have to just just like kind of like doing small talk," and then one of the girls goes, "I want to say something," like. I guess, and I feel like he was kind of like almost like sort of a heartthrob in a way, or like, or like maybe he has some kind of reputation because it seems like she, I don't know, for whatever reason, she goes into this long spiel where she says, "You and I will go to like Palestine and we will fight the Jews, like like we will like do jihad against,
I might have
like,
seen
the
this
Jews
video
and destroy
before.
them."
Yeah.
And this guy is like, "No, we can only do jihad with our words. It's too far." Like,
it's too far.
and like she's like a war orphan, so he's like, well, I mean, but remember, like, who like killed your family? And she's like, "Oh, Bashar, yeah, I want to kill him." And it's like, this person, like this girl's family was killed by like Assad, and still like her first thought is like, "I want to go to jihad in Palestine." Like, and this is like a little girl,
right.
It kind of like shows like,
oh, for sure,
but
it's still remains a sore subject for good reason with I'm sure like the commanding supermajorities of the populations in all of these neighboring
even
countries.
If the leadership, like, it's hard to like figure out what's going on with the leadership sometimes. One can't like really put too much faith in them, and usually one can't put too much faith in leaders when one looks across the world. But like if they like choose to just sell out completely, like the biggest check on that is the sentiment of the people. But yeah, and that was clearly the case here too.
I would say, yeah, if anything is maybe holding them back from like a full embrace of normalizing things with Israel, it probably is like public sentiment, especially coming from like a kind of militia that was like kind of politically Islamist and et cetera, et cetera. Like it's a lot.
Probably like I would imagine like there's a lot of people like around, even if like Jelani read like Why Institutions Fail, and like he got like is like a normalization pilled, like it's hard to believe that like the people around him,
right,
like
might be dangerous for him.
Yeah, it seemed like, I feel like you can't really like Like who knows like what like journey like this guy has got that guy in particular has gone on like an insane journey like through like many like like sus little like alleyways, but like so it's hard to figure out
He's
what's
been on a
going
long,
on like
strange trip. I think we can,
he's
it's
really
safe to
been on
say
quite,
he's been on a long, strange
possibly
trip.
like one of the longest, strangest trips of like
for
the
any
21st
world leader.
century.
If you think about like world
Like,
leaders, like where he
I mean,
started,
he
where
was
he ended
in
up.
ISIS. Like,
Yeah, like
that's just truly insane. Like when you think about it, like he was shaking hands with Trump. Like this is the guy who was like a commander in ISIS.
like he
like,
went to
not
Iraq to
that
like
long
fight
ago.
for like Abu like al-Zarqawi, you know, and like blow up American troops and shit.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
He went specifically to fight American troops.
I
in
forget,
Iraq.
was he in Camp Bucca with all the other big
Yes,
shots?
he was.
Oh,
Yeah, there's
okay.
actually like
interesting.
there's
Okay.
like I was just reading. Unfortunately, it's like heavily paywalled. Like it's not. It's like you have to subscribe, and it's like not even like a really cheap subscription. But Ayman Al-Tamimi on his Substack, like he does like great, like he does great like interviews and finds like great obscure documents about like different like interesting figures and factions in Syria. Like whatever you think about like his like positions or whatever, like he's not always like you might not always agree with him, but like the like archival and like groundwork that he does is good, and he like will talk to people of like all different opinions, like like all across the spectrum. And he found like this amazing like report that someone did about like Jelani's like early days, who was like there with him, and like basically he was someone who like worked with him early on in like al-Nusra, and he was like, this guy like never should have been trusted, he's like a snake, like he's just like I don't know why like like Khalif al-Baghdadi like trusted him, like he's like he never cared about like Dawlat al-Islamiyya, like
wow.
It's just, like
damn.
But yeah, it's funny, like there were like there were a couple of like interesting little tidbits about like how did he like this guy was just like baffled, like he was able to insinuate himself in such like an important role, because he I mean obviously like all those people have like takfired him at this point and like hate him,
right.
Yeah,
he just he hustled his way to the top somehow.
I mean it's wild, it's wild.
Yeah,
like that's like I mean maybe he has like the like political having pulled that off, maybe he has the political acumen to like go toe to toe with the American empire and Israel, but he might just get he might just sell out hard. Well we'll have to see.
I still
usually
have a lot of I have a lot of questions about what happened in Camp Bucca for a few years that produced so many sterling Islamic State commanders and leaders, that now like one of them took over like a chunk of two countries for a while, and then Trump killed him like a dog, and then this other guy is now the president of Syria. It's like, it's a lot. It's like makes you wonder about conditioning things that could happen to people.
I mean,
given what we saw with Abu Ghraib was happening,
like check out that like article on Amen Tamimi's Substack about like the early, like, because it definitely like makes you think like, damn, like this is like, cause it's like inside Camp Bucca, and this guy is like, I mean obviously it's someone who like hates him, and is kind of like looking back like, and like basically this guy is like, this guy's sus, like he can't be trusted, blah blah blah, like, and he's not a good leader, he doesn't want to, and it's like an ISIS guy, so take what you will, but he definitely like is kind of calling him sus, and it is like definitely like a sus background on like having been in Camp Bucca for sure.
Right. I really want to find the there was a guy, I can't remember his name right now, but it was like Sergeant something Ford, who like did the rounds. Here it is. Intel agent strapped to gurney and flown out of Iraq. Wow, Democracy Now! 2004. They used to go harder. It was Gregory Ford, maybe. This is a guy that like he went on a few like conspiracy like talk shows and like blogged about his experiences as like an army reservist in Iraq, serving at Abu Ghraib and I think at Camp Bucca, and he was some kind of like auxiliary intelligence officer, and this is like in 2014 he like made the rounds in like like alt media radio shit, and he claimed that he like knew Baghdadi and that like al-Baghdadi from like the 2000s, and that al-Baghdadi was an Iraqi intelligence officer that was like subjected to like MK Ultra torture at Abu Ghraib and like Camp Bucca, and like there's something up with him and like where he ended up now. And then he was also saying there was like weird, like he had shit about the Bush family and like finding nuclear bomb triggers from the Carlo group from the 80s, like in a bunker, and he was told to like shut the fuck up about it. And then like he got like strapped to a gurney by like his superiors, and they like injected him with sodium pentothal and like shipped him back to America. And then he sued the government in a lawsuit. Yeah, Vet says his superiors tried to silence him. And then this guy just like disappeared like after a while. I think his lawsuit was thrown out because like doing medical stuff to you when you're in the military, like you actually waive the right to like not have medical stuff. Frank Ford, that is what it is, an Iraq War veteran, claims in court that his superiors drugged and kidnapped him to keep him from telling the press about Abu Ghraib prison abuses, and that Saddam Hussein's still missing WMDs were made in the USA. Those are just two of the disturbing claims Frank Ford makes in a federal complaint. His attorney said the state complaint will be dismissed soon, blah, blah, blah. He accuses the defendants, including California National Guard, USA, a bunch of soldiers, of violating the Constitution. He was in the 203rd Military Intelligence Battalion and went to Iraq as a counterintelligence NCO in 2003. Yeah, and he was at... he found weapons of mass destruction in an Iraqi underground storage bunker at Balad Air Force Base with markings on them indicating they were manufactured in the United States of America. He promptly notified his higher command. And then after that, there were like VX weapons, which were made in the U.S. and brokered and shipped by the Carlyle Group, which is connected to George H.W. Bush, and shipped from Houston, Texas to Iraq for use in the Anfal Kurds and the Iranian armed forces in the 80s. Yeah. And then blah, blah, blah. He recruited a confidential informant to provide information. That might be Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, but I don't think that was in his lawsuit. He would just say that on the radio. And yeah, this guy, I think there's some kind of like rule that where military people can't sue the military for like medical abuse or things like that. Anyways, that's kind of a digression, but we should look into that one. I wonder where this guy is, because he just vanished after like 2014 and like never went on any show ever again and like never brought it up, and nobody ever brings his thing up. But he had like this tea about like Baghdadi and Camp Bucca being like, you know, some kind of horrible like MK Ultra torture thing that anyways. We should keep talking about the 30s, but but you know, this shit goes deep. I don't know. The subversion. So okay, like the Jewish Agency was talking to the National Bloc and kind of having these little like powwow sessions. Let's see, up through December. Is there anything else in these meetings that was interesting? Because I do want to talk about the spy. The spy. The Zionist disinformation campaign, maybe.
Yeah. No, that is also, pretty good to talk about. You know, I guess we can, you know,
manipulating the press.
We talked about this a little bit in past episodes, but, you know, like, just like for, you know, context, like the government, beset by internal conflicts and visual unrest, faced with France's refusal to ratify the Syrian-French treaty, would not dare interfere with the operations of Syrian and Palestinian activists inside Syria. Under the circumstances, Sasson proposed that the JA take a number of steps to influence conditions there, including urging the French government to pressure Syria to put an end to anti-Zionist propaganda in the Syrian press, urging Paris not to ratify the Syrian-French treaty. This would force Syria to exercise restraint on the Palestinian issue while increasing Syrian opposition to their own government, thereby weakening the government and diminishing popular interest in the Palestinian cause, publishing near-daily articles supporting Zionist positions in the Syrian press, raising the issue of Syria's Alexandretta, district west of Aleppo, which was then heating up as Turkey's claims to the ethnically mixed area became more pressing. Sasson recommended that articles on Alexandretta, as well as pamphlets reproducing speeches on the subject by Syrian leaders, be published to divert the Syrian population's attention from Palestine. According to Sasson, strong anti-government opposition in Aleppo over Alexandretta could easily be exploited through articles, which the Aleppo papers would be prepared to publish, attacking the government and the National Bloc, and urging the British papers to attack both the French and Syrian governments for allowing the Syrian press and population to intervene actively in the Palestinian struggle. Yeah, like I liked this quote too. Like I flagged this like an editorial that was published by the Syrian Arab journalist Abdullah Abud, but they were sent by Sasson himself and then planted in Damascus papers, and then one in Aleppo paper. This quote is from one of these editorials that was published in October 1937 as a front page editorial headlined, "We need a defense committee for Syria more than for Palestine or the rest of the Arab world." The editorial argued that for the Syrians this is a quote, "For the Syrians in their current state of abject poverty, unrest, conflict, and factionalism, to devote themselves to Palestine and other problems while they are moreover divided and weak would, besides keeping them from dealing with the situation that could result in death and destruction, also expose them to the ridicule and contempt of covetous foreigners. In such circumstances, we need a defense committee for Syria more than for Palestine or any other spot of the precious Arab land. We do not believe that a reasonable person, however swayed by rashness and radicalism, would leave his own door open while gangs of thieves are eyeing him from all sides in order to rush to save a neighbor threatened by those same thieves." It's crazy that was written by Sasson. You know,
Exactly.
Like he wrote that himself.
That's right. Yeah. Like the amount of like astroturfed arguments. Talking about about teal bucks. Like this shit is crazy. Exactly.
Like when you're reading about anything in like the Middle East, especially in English, but in any language, like on social media, just bear this in mind. Like never lose sight of that. You know, if it's like, oh, these people are doing this, like, oh my God, like just think for a second, you know, and like remember those bullet points. Like they're not all like some of them are contradictory, right? You know, like people like who are saying it's not like, you know, people are like, oh, you know, this like blah, 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 like blah, blah, this side is like this side. Like it's like, think about it. Like think about like what's going on here. Let's be
or like
smart,
I couldn't be being manipulated because
be
like they have the position. Then
exactly.
I'm just like taking it
I'm not being
value.
manipulated because I think this. It's like, they're like taking a lot of different positions, and it's all designed to. They have one.
They've
goal,
accounted for that,
but
basically. It's dialectical. I mean, remember that kind of famous meme of like the COINTELPRO like list of like disruptive tactics that like, you know, undercover agents should use, and it's like always like start fights over like the pettiest like small details and blah blah blah. And a lot of people pointed out like, oh, you know, this is always something to watch out for in like movements. And then people go, well, you know, even if you're not a Fed, like you're doing everything on this list, so like it's bad. But they're kind of dialectical about this. Like they're not just coming at it from like one like let's publish just articles that are like Zionism rules. Like it's they're getting involved in like niche disputes that they calculate will like if we can nudge this group to taking more of a position of, let's say, like even something that like just as a kind of vague example, but like to write articles implying that like Jews control all the governments in Europe, and in almost like a kind of anti-Semitic way, right? Like you would think, oh well, like Israel would never sponsor that because that's anti-Semitic.
Exactly.
Like what the fuck? But it's like no. Like, but then if the argument goes on, it's like because they control the world, we should deal with them and like not piss them off, and they could get like if we partner with them, like they could get us a better deal with France. And then suddenly you have a like effectively, objectively pro-Zionist argument, even though it's like bad mouthing, you know, the Jews, like, and, you know, kind of spreading like slander about them, right?
Yes.
You know, like that's one example where there's layers to this game.
Or even like you were saying, like, you know, like Al Husseini's like gossip, you know, or whatever. That type of thing that like, oh, like this person is, like collaborating with the Zionists, you know, like they'll, like that type of thing too, like they promote all the time because they know that like totally like is one of the worst things you can accuse someone of, and that is like one of the best ways to like undermine solidarity is to like, you know, like spread rumors about who's collaborating with whom, you know, like they have a good sense of like where, you know,
And all the more important because I guess as we'll see a little further down here, they actually did they had actual collaborators on the payroll that they wanted to like direct attention away from. So, you know, they had to cover themselves like in that, you know, regard. But, you know, if you just flood, you know, the zone with like shit, then you can't see, you know, who the real I think the Syrian government even tried to like figure out at a certain point, like, oh, somebody's like inside it, like we have a mole, somebody's spying, and then it just never went anywhere because they focused on the wrong people. They didn't suspect the right people, and they kind of floated by undetected. But, all the more reason to do a subtle campaign that's like not too fucking obvious. Like, they don't want to recruit everybody to be like Ben Shapiro in like the Damascus newspaper, right? Like that's not that good. They have a much more, this is pretty relatively sophisticated. To what extent it was like a decisive influence is a little more like debatable, but it's certainly kind of nudged the public, even within like Arab countries, like nudged the discourse in a certain direction. And it really, but from an Arab or a Syrian nationalist perspective, like, it was speaking in the voice of Arabs that were, we have to look out for our own interests first. Like these Palestinians, like they're not Syrians, we got to focus on Syria first, And I guess maybe I'll read a little here, like from the press, the press manipulation chapter, laying the ground in the early 30s. They say it was after the 1929 Al-Barak uprising, which erupted in Jerusalem in response to Zionist demonstrations at the Wailing Wall and spread from there, that the JA political department stepped up its efforts to influence Arab opinion via the press. The daily coverage of the unfolding events, sensationalized by the involvement for the first time of the holy places, had galvanized the Arab world behind the Palestinian Arab people. For the Zionist leadership, the need for countermeasures was clear. So in January 1930, Chaim Kalvarisky, head of intelligence in the JA political department, visited Beirut, where he helped organize a committee of 4 Lebanese Jewish activists who were assigned to influence Lebanese and Syrian newspapers to adopt pro-Zionist positions. He gave them a budget of 150 Palestinian pounds to carry out this mission. He reported some success in getting some Beirut newspapers, including the Arabic language Al-Ahwal and the French language L'Orient, and La Syrie, to modify their editorial lines, and a few other papers as well. Then similar things, I guess, were happening in Egypt as well. Colonel Frederick Kish was influencing people in the Egyptian press to be a little more supportive of Zionism, and also set up a group of informants to work for the intelligence services. Okay, so the next one was, the Al-Sharq news agency, which continued for many years to disseminate disinformation intended to undermine the Palestinian national movement. Syrian and Lebanese press. Okay, here we go. The outbreak of the Palestinian rebellion in April 1936 with the declaration of a general strike met with widespread support in the Arab countries, especially Syria, whose own nationalist movement, the National Bloc, had conducted its own 43-day general strike in January. The Syrian strike's success had compelled French mandatory officials to open negotiations on a treaty of independence, and in November 1936, the National Bloc decisively won the Syrian parliamentary elections. The Syrians saw the Arab Revolt next door as part of the same wider Arab movement towards independence. Support from both the population at large and the political leadership was expressed in the press and through popular strikes and demonstrations, the boycott of Jewish Zionist products, and direct material assistance to the Palestinians organized by the Palestine Defense Committee established in Damascus. Armed Syrian volunteers also crossed into Palestine to help the rebels. Although the National Bloc, as the lead party in the government, now had to be careful not to alienate Britain, on which Syria depended in its quest for independence from France, many of Syria's most active Palestinian supporters were affiliated with it. Though Lebanon was also under French mandate, the situation there was quite different. With the Sunni population far from reconciled to the Franco-Maronite project of Greater Lebanon, the Lebanese mandatory government was largely a Maronite Christian affair. Let's see. The implications of the developments in Syria and Lebanon were not lost in Sasson and his colleagues. In October 1936, Sasson noted having seen, quote, with his own eyes in Beirut, people running after newspaper vendors, grabbing at papers to read the latest news on the situation in Palestine. He further observed that the Lebanese public appeared far more interested in the situation in Palestine than in the Lebanese parliamentary elections taking place at the same time. He reported that all the nationalist leaders that were important in Lebanon supported the Palestinian rebels and were pressuring Syria's National Bloc-led government not to do anything that might compromise the Arab Revolt. According to Sasson, the government, beset by internal conflicts and provincial unrest and faced with France's refusal to ratify the Syrian-French treaty, would not dare interfere with the operations of Syrian and Palestinian activists inside Syria. Under the circumstances, he proposed the JA take a number of steps to influence conditions there, including urging the French government to pressure Syria to put an end to anti-Zionist propaganda.
Is the same list
Okay. I think we read that earlier.
Yeah.
So then Elihu Sasson sets to work.
This is a good part. Yeah, I mean, we also read the beginning of this, but
with Aboud and
This is a good part because there actually was like a kind of like a little bit of tension between Sasson and Chertok, Chertok, the future prime minister, over like how to manage the media. This is a good section. It's the section of tactical differences between Chertok and Sasson. When Sasson returned to Jerusalem, proud of his accomplishment of planting 28 articles in 11 Damascus and Beirut newspapers at an average cost of 75 Palestinian currency, Palestinian dollars, I guess they're using, or Palestinian pounds.
Palestinian pounds. So
I guess not dollars.
Seems like worth roughly what a pound is, because they're paying people like $10 to like spy on their country. Like 10 pounds. So it must be a lot.
Yeah, he was confronted by Chertok's decision to limit the number of articles to only 2 per week. In Sasson's opinion, threatening the entire project. The particulars of the tactical disagreement between the two emerged from a long letter dated December 22nd, 1937, that Sasson, greatly upset, wrote to Chertok in an effort to dissuade him from this decision. It seems that Chertok was motivated by 2 considerations. 1, the political department's budget did not permit the placement of articles with such frequency, and 2, the publication of 28 such articles in 11 days would inevitably raise suspicion and risk exposing their provenance. This is exactly like what we're talking about, though. This is how he explains it. He says Sasson's rebuttal to Chertok's reasoning in defense of his own concept, including the following arguments. Readers, first argument, readers would have no reason to suspect that the articles were dubious or planted by Jews because of their range of subject matter and diverse formats, some being news reports reportedly by correspondents in Palestine, others having bylines with fictitious Arab names. Furthermore, the articles were clear, in-depth, based on a solid knowledge of Syrian, Lebanese, and Palestinian issues, and written to express a genuine concern for Arab economic, political, and social interests.
Damn.
Second point, between them, Beirut and Damascus produced 27 Arabic language dailies, 18 in Beirut, 9 in Damascus. Each has its own readership and circulation, and most, if not all, quote, print on a daily basis feminist, anti-Zionist articles about our conspiracies and colonial ambitions in Palestine and neighboring countries. In such a setting, Sasson argued just 2 articles would have no effect whatsoever. Next point, if the purpose of the articles was merely to counter foreign propaganda, 2 articles per week might have been enough. But our purpose is not limited, this is a quote, to dealing with only one subject. We treat numerous matters, all of which are serious, important, and urgent. Terrorism and the support it receives from the Arab states. Terrorism is in quotes here. I'm not sure if those are the author's quotes or if they're this guy's quotes. It's showing a little bit of self-awareness. But and the support it receives from Arab states, foreign propaganda, Arab state involvement in the Palestine problem, partition, mutual understanding, the strength of the Yishuv in Palestine, the fight against Hajj Amin al-Husseini and his supporters, problems and issues in the neighboring countries and their impact on Palestine, etc. Next point, worsening conditions of late make such articles even more necessary. Syria, now a base for the Palestinian national movement, is playing an increasingly important role in the Palestinian struggle, while foreign propaganda in Lebanon and Syria is intensifying. Final point, publishing only 2 articles a week, one in Damascus and the other in Beirut, will not work. No Syrian or Lebanese newspaper would agree to take an isolated position against quote-unquote radicals and quote-unquote nationalists by publishing a single article on the subject. A mere 2 articles in just 2 papers would expose them for what they are and raise suspicions about them, which is not in the JA's interests.
Wow. You gotta flood the space with like a million YouTube shows.
Yeah.
The Ben Shapiro Network must be launched.
Yeah, and he actually made a point, which is like, because they're budgetary concerned raised. And he was like, all I need is 60 Palestinian pounds per month. And that's enough. Like these are not expensive, to place.
Yeah, he said in a cover letter in December 1937, the impact of the articles in Syrian and Lebanese elite and popular opinion would take at least 6 months and perhaps up to a year. And perhaps up to a year to be felt, and this only if the publication schedule proceeded uninterrupted and at the recommended pace. So he's like, yeah, they need 6 months to a year before the psyops start like sinking in. and by like just inundating people with like this fake slop. Like it is wild. Yeah, just like fake authors, like completely. It's crazy.
Yeah, this is a good like one that comes up. The like as you were talking about the Conference of Arab Parliamentarians in Cairo. This is like an autumn 1938. Much of their disinformation effort during that time was focused on this conference, Arab and Islamic Parliamentarians on Palestine, held in Cairo in October 1938 as a follow-up to the September 1937 Blue Dot Conference. As the date of the Cairo conference approached, Sasson redoubled his efforts with Lebanese and Syrian press and personalities to sabotage the conference by getting the largest possible number of parliamentarians of both countries to boycott it. During his 4-day visit to Beirut at the end of September and beginning of October 1838, he had meetings with numerous journalists, editors, and newspaper owners, including 3 with Ilyas Harfouch at Al Hadith, 2 with Seyman Saif at Al Ahwal, and 1 with Asad Aql, the editor of Al Bayrak. During this brief visit, Sasson managed to get in 3 trips to Damascus to confer with Tawfiq Janneh, Istiqlal al-Arabi, and other Syrian personalities. The meetings all focused on the Cairo conference, and in most cases, the editors and newspaper owners he met with agreed to call in the name of their editorial for the non-participation of the Lebanese and Syrian parliamentarians. According to Sasson's report, 8 articles inveighing against the parliamentarians' participation in the conference were published in the Beirut dailies Al-Ahwal, Al-Ittihad, Lisan al-Hal, Asat al-Ahrar, due to his personal efforts. The articles emphasized that anyone attending the conference could do so only in his personal capacity. In a long lead article, Saut al-Ahrar, the sound of freedom, of the, of the free.
On the nose there.
Demanded that the conference call for an end to the disorderly conduct in Palestine and for negotiations between the parties to reach a reasonable resolution to the Palestine problem. Sasson also reports Harfouch's promise to visit the Lebanese president, Emile Edi, the head of the political section of the French legation to Beirut, to urge that they ask the parliamentarians planning to attend the conference to withdraw so as to preserve Lebanon's neutrality and avoid the disapproval of the British and the Jews. According to Sasson, Harfouch also committed himself to publishing the next 2 days strongly worded articles against the conference aims in general and the participation of Lebanese parliamentarians in particular.
Right.
So, this was a huge,
I want to read the end of the project thing here. I just have to pee really quick. I'll be back in 2 minutes. Okay. I just wanted to read the kind of the closeout here of I guess this project started to like wind down near the end of 1938, mostly for financial reasons, because the JA, I guess Chertok, he says, as director of the JA's political department, was constantly faced with competing priorities and forced to balance between them. But he was a firm believer in like the importance of this project and the dire consequences of discontinuing it. I guess in one of the letters he wrote complaining about defending the program, he made a surprising revelation, quote, In addition to placing articles in Arab newspapers, the Arabic division carried out a far more important operation, namely buying Arabic newspapers in Syria and Lebanon. In the summer of 1938, we succeeded in buying 5 newspapers, 3 in Beirut and 2 in Damascus. We could have bought more, but we didn't have the budget, and for the same reason, we were soon compelled to suspend the relationship, even with the papers we had actually bought. What Sasson meant by, quote, buying becomes apparent in his description of the tasks required of the newspapers in exchange for the set payments they were to receive. The scope of these sums at the cost of the entire purchase venture are nowhere spelled out in the memorandum, nor could any such reference be found elsewhere in the files. According to the memorandum, the bought newspapers were obliged to publish, this is a quote, to publish articles and news that we supply to them, to refrain from publishing material hostile to Zionism provided by the other side and foreign sources, to bring together Arab and Jewish viewpoints, denounce Arab terrorism in Palestine, and to adopt a pro-Zionist Jewish posture on all political issues. Sasson's eagerness to justify or sell his program to superiors led him to go so far as to claim at least partial credit for the growth of the Palestinian collaborationist movement funded by the British in opposition to the Palestinian national leadership. This had led to the organization under Britain of Palestinian armed groups, the Peace Brigades, to fight the nationalist guerrillas. Specifically, Sasson's memo stated, "It is important to emphasize that the articles published in the newspapers we bought, as well as in other newspapers, against Arab terrorism and concerning the conspiracies and initiatives of the Mufti and his henchmen indirectly encouraged the Nashashibi party to emerge into open warfare against the AHC and the leadership of the terrorism." While Sasson's claim is certainly exaggerated, the proliferation of articles supposedly written by well-meaning Arabs and Palestinians depicting the rebellion as terrorism may have swayed readers, especially outside Palestine. Yeah, so I guess he says that in final summary, it is difficult to assess the impact of the JA's covert placement of articles on Syrian, Lebanese, and wider Arab support for the Palestinian cause. As noted above, a total of 280 articles had been planted in the Syrian and Lebanese press up to mid-July 1938, with dozens more placed before the program came to an end. In all likelihood, it was not great, but whatever the case, the JA's political department's 1937-38 publication program, as documented in the CZA, sheds light on several issues. I guess it says the reports paint a very unflattering picture of the press and political elite in Lebanon and Syria, or certain segments of it, in the decade before the 1948 war. The success of the JA's political department's intelligence in so easily infiltrating widely distributed Lebanese and Syrian newspapers at the time cannot be attributed to its exceptional skills or financial resources. Rather, it was basically due to the feebleness of Arab society, the effeteness and corruption of sectors of the elite, the widespread shortage of cash and capital at the time, and endemic internal conflicts on grounds of clan, sect, and region. It is worth noting that the same parties who succumbed to the JA's financial inducements were vociferous in their public denunciations of the influence and power of Jews and Zionists over the Western press. Interesting. Yeah. And I guess the second point was the archives make abundantly clear that the JA's political department was not content merely to present the Zionist point of view, to misrepresent the Palestinian national struggle, or to offer alternative solutions to the Palestine problem. It exceeded these limits to distort and even invent facts outright, planting fabricated news reports about non-existent conspiracies, or besmirching the reputations of established public figures, notably Arab nationalist figures deeply concerned about the Palestine problem, with false accusations. By these means, the JA's political department hoped to foster an Arab public opinion that would oppose the national rights of the Palestinian people and accept the establishment of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. Yeah. So that was that, and I think that that's something also that they've continued to do up to this day. I mean, not necessarily in a. Not to co-sign their own reverse psychology propaganda that they control all of the Western press, but like in terms of being able to like launder in their point of view in both legacy media and in the new media space, as we see with a lot of people, right? You know, like the Shapiros, but there are kind of many others that.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely see like a lot of these same lines being pushed today. Absolutely, like the. yeah, like the whole like, oh, you need to focus on yourself, blah, blah, like we obviously pointed out the similarities, but yeah, I think that it's even become, yeah, like more like sophisticated and more elaborate, like in some ways. Like I think that they just like yeah, like as you said, like flood the zone with
Right.
like all sorts of like different like contrasting opinions that like can support like, as long as they lead to like disunity, like I think that they probably realize at this point that like creating like an Arab public opinion in general that opposes the national rights of the Palestinian people is like,
not viable.
yeah, not super viable. So now they just like hope to like sow like confusion and undermine like, any unity. And like, yeah.
Yeah. So that's where you get like Bronze Age Zionism, where people are like basically like Nazis, but also like say the IDF is like based and like they love Israel. You know what I mean? Like it's like, oh wait, those two things should be contradictory, or should be kind of
or
contradictory, maybe, but
or like Hamas works for Israel or something like that, like Hamas like
all
is
kinds
an
of things like
Israel
that.
plot and like meant to destroy like secular like
Yeah.
leadership in Palestine or
Whatever
whatever.
the fuck
Like,
Azalea Banks has been saying lately about
yeah,
like
that's
her hot
exactly
takes. Yeah.
that maybe shows like the development of these strategies, like just like the absolute chaos that we see coming from Azalea Banks.
Sir, we got like, 27 incredibly long Azalea tweets this month about how, Arabs are actually like the real enslaving colonizers of the world, and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah,
There's
I mean,
some department, some Hasbro department is
yeah, I mean,
getting a raise off that.
Before we talk about Nasib Bakri, it might be good to like talk a little bit about like the Peel Commission, because this is like a big, development.
Right.
So, and
Right.
this kind of is an interesting way into it. This section is Eliyahu Epstein and David Haas meet with Jamil Mardam, but it talks a little about the Peel Commission.
Yeah.
In the wake of the fierce outbreak of the 1936 Arab Revolt, the British government formed a royal commission in November 1936 to investigate the situation in Palestine, known as the Peel Commission, after its president, Lord Peel. The Peel Commission report, submitted to the British government and ratified in July 1937, recommended that Palestine be partitioned into 3 regions: an Arab area annexed to Transjordan, a Jewish area where a Jewish state would be established and approximately 300,000 Palestinian Arabs expelled, and an area comprising Jerusalem, Bethlehem, Nazareth, a corridor from Jerusalem to Jaffa, taking in the cities it passed through, such as Lydda and Ramla, Haifa, Tiberias, Safed, Acre, and a large part of the Negev that would remain under the British mandate. The Arab High Committee, led by Haj Amin al-Hosseini, rejected the Peel Commission recommendations and worked to mobilize Arab countries against them. The Zionist movement's initial reaction was one of dismay, given that the Commission's recommendations only granted the Jews, quote, a small part of Palestine. See, like you can see, like this involves like like expelling, ethnically cleansing 300,000 people, but it's like still like not enough, and it's only granted them a small part. Okay.
Yeah.
Opposition, however, gradually softened due to a clause that stipulated the transfer of Palestinians from the proposed Jewish state. David Ben-Gurion attached utmost importance to the transfer recommendation and stressed that the Zionist movement must adhere to the recommendation as we adhere to the Balfour Declaration, even to Zionism itself. Damn. We must adhere to this recommendation with our utmost strength, will, and hopes. Because in this recommendation, out of all the recommendations, there is some compensation for sloughing off other parts of the country. The transfer clause, I believe, is more important than all our demands to increase the area. Since we are not able to get the Arabs out of our midst now and transfer them to Arab regions, which is the proposal of a British Royal Commission, and it is something we could not do easily, if at all, after the establishment of the state, when the whole hostile world is watching how we treat our minority. What a
That's
statement.
fucking wild. Yeah. Finally, there's some compensation for sloughing off other parts of the country. Compensation meaning like ethnically cleansing it, and like having a sanction to ethnically cleanse. 'Cause I guess their idea is that they can expand the territory they control. Well, the British said that like we can transfer population out of it, right? Like,
well,
we just happen to
like,
take a little more,
Well, we want to transfer, and like they are saying we can transfer, and that's something we could not do easily. Whereas,
Yeah,
maybe we
yeah.
could expand more easily, you know?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, well, yeah,
And the
exactly.
whole
Like we could
hostile
do that on
world
our
is
own
watching
better.
how we
Yeah.
treat our minority. Like, what? Like, you're complaining about the world's hostility when you're planning like a genocide?
Get them out
Like,
of their midst
you're
now.
literally saying like,
Yeah.
oh, the whole hostile. I guess he's using hostile in the neutral sense, where it's like not saying like that they're wrong to be hostile. I guess he's saying they're right to be hostile because we're planning a genocide, and if they were watching, they would be appalled.
Yeah.
All right,
The world's
but
not going to like what we're doing.
yeah.
But we have to
I
deal
also
with
like
that.
how he like equated this with Zionism itself. He said
Yes.
like we must adhere to this recommendation as we adhere to Zionism itself.
Right. So keep that in mind the next time somebody says that, like, yeah, like the British didn't give any kind of leg up to the Zionists. In fact, like the Zionists had to decolonially bomb them, to like stand up for their rights. Because like we weren't totally put in power with like the indispensable help of the British. It's like, well, David Ben-Gurion believed otherwise. Like, in fact, he instructed everybody that, like, shh, this is the best deal we're ever going to get. Like, we have to.
Yeah,
in fact,
or
I
when
mean,
someone
it's helpful
says, like,
to pretend that it's so bad.
Anti-Zionist. Zionism is just believing that Jews like need a homeland or something like that. When it's like, well, David Ben-Gurion said that Zionism is when you ethnically cleanse 300,000 people and plan to do it to more. So
he did not see the difference between the two things.
No.
This is how it had to go.
He loved the recommendation. He lived for it.
Yeah, just that little clause. He loves little clauses.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, I think we have a little time left here. I think it might be good to talk about the man in the national bloc that ends up on the payroll of the JA.
Yeah, it's on page 64, I think.
64. Oh, okay, yeah, right here. Yeah, the recruitment of Nasib al-Bakri, who was a leader of the national bloc in Syria. So this is an interesting story and like a case study. I mean, they did this to like a number of people, but he's probably, I guess, one of the most prominent in Syrian politics to get recruited. And yeah, I mean, once again, like, something you probably have to watch out for today, but I'll read a little bit here. In a significant accomplishment, in February 1938, the JA recruited Nasib al-Bakri, a leader of the National Bloc, to work as a spy. Al-Bakri, who occupied an important position in the leadership of the National Bloc and the Syrian national movement in general, was an ideal candidate given the timing of recruitment at the height of the Arab Revolt and at the peak of its threat to the Zionist project. So he was born in Damascus to an aristocratic family who claimed descent from the Prophet Muhammad. Born in 1888, studied at the preparatory school in Damascus, etc. He joined, along with his brother, the secret Al-Arabiya Al-Fatat Society, the Young Arab Society, and was one of the first to join the revolution of Emir Faisal, who in 1918 appointed him as a personal advisor. After the fall of the Faisal government and French army's occupation of Damascus, al-Bakri was considered as a candidate for the throne in Syria. When the Syrian Revolution erupted in 1925, he was one of the first to join in support. In 1932, he was elected to the Syrian parliament as a member for Damascus. He was one of the founders and leaders of the National Bloc and head of its Damascus branch. And he was also appointed governor of Jabal al-Druze, the Druze area. In late 1939, he moved closer to the Shah Bandar camp and came to be counted part of it. He was Minister of Justice briefly in 1939, and then that of Agriculture and Economy. He was elected to the Syrian parliament in 1943 and 49, and prominent founder of the People's Party that's not the SSNP, is it? No, I think it's a different party. In 1948, having been elected party vice president. So he was more religiously conservative than his colleagues and enjoyed support among the traditional masses in ordinary neighborhoods. And his strong ties with veterans of 1925 revolution also boosted his popularity. Israeli archival documents show that al-Bakri remained the JA's agent for several years. Through their dealings with him, the JA achieved a number of significant goals. Most prominently, he lists it, obtaining accurate information about the Palestinian revolutionaries, their Syrian supporters, their ways of entering Palestine and smuggling weapons from Syria to Palestine, and about the sources and quantities of these weapons, 2, obtaining important and accurate information about the decisions and policies of the national bloc and the Syrian government, especially regarding the Palestinian issue and the Arab Revolt in Palestine, the Jewish Agency and the Zionist Project, and, after he became a minister in the Syrian government, influencing many of the policies and decisions of the Syrian government and the national bloc on the Arab Revolt, Syrian support for it, and attitudes towards the Jewish Agency. So, going on here, the beginning of his collaboration, I guess he got on well with Syrian parliamentarian and JA agent Yusuf Linyadu. At the beginning of February 1938, Linyadu sent a report to the Arab division of the JA's political department indicating that al-Bakri was ready to cooperate with the agency and had important information to pass on. Sassoon traveled from Jerusalem to Damascus to meet him. In February 1938, Sassoon met al-Bakri in Damascus 3 times. On the third meeting, al-Bakri agreed to start cooperating with the JA. In his report to Moshe Shertok, Sassoon noted that he and al-Bakri had spoken openly. Al-Bakri said that he and Yusuf Linyadu had, quote, talked several times about the situation in Palestine, and both of them had concluded the necessity of inviting representatives from the Jewish Agency to discuss with them the measures to be taken in Syria, Paris, and London to bring about positive, rapid, and concrete change to the situation in Palestine. Sassoon thanked al-Bakri and asked him about his alleged information on Italian and German propaganda in Syria, on the rebels' organizations, and on arms smuggling to Palestine, and asked him whether he was ready to cooperate with the JA. Al-Bakri said that he was, quote, ready to undertake serious research to disclose all these matters, and that he was confident that he would receive all the required help from his friends who participated in the Syrian Revolution, some of whom smuggle weapons and recruit revolutionaries. Through his brother, Mazhar al-Bakri, Director General of the Damascus Police, he could recruit all the police and their informants to investigate the activities of Palestinian revolutionaries in Syria. Through his acquaintance with Colonel Panke, Director General of the Syrian Police, he could make fundamental changes to border security, despite Adel al-Azma, Director of the Interior Department. Al-Bakri added that he knew of, quote, the existing relations between Adel al-Azma and his brother Nabi and the Palestinian revolutionaries, and claimed he could stop them through government leaders in Syria. He also claimed to have acquaintances, friends, and relatives in most of the banks in Damascus, so he could review all transfers from outside Syria and in the names of Palestinian revolutionaries and their supporters and friends in Damascus. He also knew that Mohammed al-Ashmar was the leading arms smuggler to Palestine, and heard 2 weeks prior from al-Ashmar himself that he had smuggled into Palestine in just 1 week 220 rifles and a large quantity of ammunition. Mohammed al-Ashmar would travel that week to Iraq and to the Hejaz, and al-Bakri knew the people who worked for him, and by talking to them once or twice, he could find out the names and methods of the smugglers and the names of the Palestinian revolutionaries responsible for smuggling. At the end of his statements, al-Bakri asked Sassoon whether the JA agency was ready to seriously discuss all these matters with him. According to his report, Sassoon believed al-Bakri had not sufficiently studied the issue, and it would be better for him to first become familiar with all its aspects and prepare in a week or two a concrete plan to submit to the JA. Al-Bakri then asked about, quote, expenses and whether they should be included in the plan. Sassoon told him that expenses should be addressed so that everything was clear and known from the start, and added that if his director decided for some reason to reject the plan, this should not affect their relationship. Okay, yeah. So Sassoon focused on 4 issues he needed al-Bakri to work on. 1, stopping the Arab Revolt in Palestine. B, stopping the poisonous anti-Zionist propaganda in the Syrian press, mosque sermons, and various meetings in Syria. 3, trying to make whatever possible support for the Jewish Agency from the Syrian people, especially its leaders. And 4, trying to find an appropriate solution to the Palestinian issue. Yeah, so he promised to submit a plan. A few weeks later, he sent his proposal. The key provisions he committed to achieve were stopping anti-Zionist propaganda in the press and the mosques, preventing Syrians from joining the Arab Revolt in Palestine, preventing Palestinian revolutionaries from entering Syria, stopping the arms trade in Damascus, monitoring and guarding the routes to Palestine, and tightening measures at border posts. So there you go. So then he enters into the employ, but he asks for a large sum of money. So the JA debates about this, and they did have a modest budget. They didn't have like a ton of capital to work with in these years. So they decided to like pay him, I think, in like kind of tranches, like based on every kind of assignment that he did for them or every piece of information with him. So pay him a little bit up front and then like kind of string him along. And let's see. So they asked him finally for a comprehensive and detailed report on the activities, relations plans, financial sources, etc., of the Palestinian revolutionaries. 2, information that can be used to ask the French authorities to deport Palestinians from Damascus and Beirut. And 3, clear information on the dates for the smuggling of rebel groups and weapons into Palestine in order to make preparations to arrest them. Sasson and Shaloa emphasized that the third point was the most crucial for the JA and that it was willing to pay handsomely to achieve that particular aim. So yeah, like he's basically getting into bed with them to like arrest, Palestinian revolutionaries that are taking refuge in Syria and people giving arms to them.
I mean, basically, like, and the Lufti al-Hafar government also like collaborated with them, and al-Bakri like also like kind of, like tried to become prime minister, like basically under the auspices of the Jewish Agency. Like
he did, right?
Yeah.
Like he made some moves for it. I don't think it ended up happening. But...
Yeah, no, it didn't end up happening. But yeah, al-Bakri aspired to become Syrian prime minister after Lufti al-Hafar's resignation. In March 1938, David Lauzia sent Sasson a letter informing him that he had met that day with al-Bakri, who informed him about problems between the Syrian government and the French, and that its resignation was imminent. Lauzia added that al-Bakri told him that he had close ties with President Hashim al-Attasi and believed that should the government resign, the president would appoint him to form the new government. In the letter, Lauzia also said that he had paid Bakri I'm not sure what actually, I guess it's the Syrian pounds or Syrian currency was being used at the time, 500. So from the correspondence between JA's agents in Damascus, I mean, what were they using, like dirhams? What was the Syrian currency at this time?
I don't know.
I don't really know. Yeah. From the correspondence between JA's agent in Damascus, David Lauzia, and the JA leadership, it appears that in this period, Nassim al-Bakri needed financial support to facilitate his becoming prime minister of Syria. So, I mean, that also continues to the present day. There was like one Israeli like spy, like literally, like just straight up a spy, like from Israel, who like was Israeli, like who almost became like the deputy, like, minister of defense of Syria. Like,
wow.
Yeah,
there's like an Israeli pretending to be Arab.
Yes, I need to
when did this happen?
Exactly what his name was. Eli Cohen, Eliyahu, I guess popular name, Ben Shaul Cohen. He died in 1965. He developed close relations with Syrian political and military hierarchy, and eventually his true allegiance was uncovered by Syrian intelligence, and he was convicted and sentenced to death and hanged in Damascus in 1965. But there's like streets and roads named after him in Israel. He was almost deputy minister of defense. Right before his arrest, he was on the short list for deputy minister of defense.
That's wild.
Yeah.
That is pretty wild.
Yeah,
wow.
So it happens.
It does. So he kind of tumbles down this path of getting deeper and deeper involved in like JA espionage against his own kind of political movement and the government. Thinking
there was another interesting episode where like he had to go who was it that he had to kind of like try to recruit
Mohammed al-Ashmar.
Yes, exactly.
In his report, I guess let's see. Abdullah Aboud was also a JA agent in Damascus, and he suggested to Sasson that they should recruit Mohammed al-Ashmar to work on its behalf. In his report, Aboud indicated that he had met with al-Ashmar and believed he believed that the JA could, quote, buy him. Jesus. Al-Ashmar's role in the Syrian and Palestinian national struggle would have been an asset for the JA. He was one of the leaders of the 1925 Syrian Revolution. He had joined the Arab Revolt and entered Palestine through Transjordan in August 1936 at the head of a large group of Syrian revolutionaries and had joined up with the Arab revolutionaries who had entered Palestine at the time under the leadership of Fawzi al-Kawukji, Fawzi Bey. After obtaining the approval of the JA's political department head, Shurtak, Sasson asked al-Bakri to recruit al-Ashmar to work for the JA agency. Al-Bakri was cautious and felt he could not openly propose to al-Ashmar that he, quote, sell himself to the Jews. He suggested to Sasson that Yusuf Linyadu do the job, and if he succeeded in recruiting al-Ashmar, then al-Bakri would take him on for joint work. So al-Bakri told Sasson that at his recent meeting with al-Ashmar, he had spoken to him about the need to stop the support of Syrians for the Arab Revolt, and that he explained to him the strength of the Jews' influence in France and how they could harm Syria and put pressure on Léon Blum, the Jewish prime minister of France, and his party, which contained many Jews, and delay the ratification of the agreement between Syria and France. See, there's that sophisticated argument, right? Al-Ashmar had listened attentively, believed him, al-Bakri said, and he had promised to talk with his men. Al-Ashmar told al-Bakri that the Palestinian leaders of the Arab Revolt were pressing him to support the Arab Revolt in Palestine with weapons and volunteers, but that he put the matter off week after week, and that the Syrian opposition, led by Dr. Abdelrahman al-Shabandar, was demanding that he devoted himself to Syrian issues alone. At Sasson's request, Linyadu met al-Ashmar twice to try to recruit him. At both meetings, al-Ashmar expressed his readiness to assist the JA in putting an end to the Arab Revolt in Palestine. He said he would influence Damascenes, who were recruiting revolutionaries and smuggling weapons, to stop and provide information about the rebel organizations, their activities, entryways into Palestine, and information that would lead to their arrest. Linyadu and al-Ashmar did not address how much al-Ashmar would charge for his services. He was mainly concerned with establishing political relations with the JA and asked Linyadu to arrange a meeting for him with the official representative of the agency. In that period, the JA was making informal contacts with the Syrian National Bloc and did not want to make parallel contacts with al-Ashmar, who was known to belong to the Syrian Shabandari opposition, a rival of the National Bloc. The JA, however, did not want to miss this valuable opportunity, particularly since he could have proved useful in efforts to curb the Arab Revolt in Palestine. The JA decided to send, Abba Hushi to Damascus to meet with al-Ashmar. Hushi was not an official JA employee, but had extensive experience dealing with Arabs, recruiting some of them to work on behalf of Zionism, etc.
Yeah.
So
their meeting is also worth recounting. So on March 23rd, 1938, al-Ashmar and al-Bahushi met in the town of Harasta near Damascus. Al-Ashmar told Hushi that he had heard good things about him from Yusuf al-Aysami and another person, whose name Hushi did not mention in his report, and about his relations with Arabs. Al-Ashmar then told him that many Arab parties had pushed for him to accept the leadership of the armed Arab revolt in Palestine, and that after his recent return from the pilgrimage to Mecca, he had met twice with Haj Amin al-Husseini at the latter's request. At the second meeting, held that previous week, al-Husseini had asked him to lead the armed Arab revolt in Palestine, in response to which al-Ashmar had laid out a set of conditions that would need to be met if he had to take on the leadership of the armed revolt. Al-Husseini refused. Al-Ashmar added that the internal situation in Syria had changed, and that this called him to devote himself to the Syrian issue. On his last meeting with Haj Amin al-Husseini, he told him that he would not lead the armed Arab revolt in Palestine. Al-Ashmar said that the real reason for his stance was that the opposition in Syria was secretly planning to forcefully take power in Syria. At this point in his report, Abba Hushi wrote that Muhammad al-Ashmar asked him to follow him and continued, I walked with him about 150 to 200 steps from the room where we were, and he took me into a cellar. We went down 16 steps and he lit a candle. I saw an arms cache in the cellar, which was about 3 meters wide and between 8 and 10 meters long. Half of it was full of different types of weapons, piles of rifles and pistols, ammunition, explosives, and grenades. Al-Ashmar then reunited with his guest returned with his guest to the meeting room. And Hushi adds in his report that Al-Ashmar reached the important issue behind his invitation to me. Al-Ashmar told Hushi that the Syrian opposition was unhappy with the Syrian government because it was corrupt and had brought the country to a predicament. The opposition wanted to seize power. Al-Ashmar asked Hushi to have the Zionist movement influence French Prime Minister Blum and take a position in support of the Syrian opposition.
Wow.
The Syrian opposition knew that it was impossible to seize power without the consent of France, which has significant power in Syria, and that the Zionist movement had great influence in France since the French Prime Minister was Jewish and a socialist. Al-Ashmar added, according to al-Bahushi's report, that Dr. al-Shahbandar was leading the Syrian opposition and wanted to achieve peace between Jews and Arabs, and had a plan to do so. And if the JA responded to the request to influence Blum and France in the interest of the opposition and Dr. al-Shahbandar, then he, al-Ashmar, was ready to help us with everything he can do. Until the opposition reached power in Syria, al-Ashmar was ready to prevent fighting men from joining the Arab Revolt. If the opposition reached power in Syria, it would prevent Syrians from joining the Arab Revolt in Palestine and use a strong hand against the Palestinian revolutionaries present in Syria.
Damn.
Yeah.
That's not so solidaristic.
No, definitely not.
Say.
Yeah. And you can definitely imagine that like conversations like that are being had now. And have been, like part of the whole like story of the last like 14 years in Syria.
Right. That's truly an ain't nothing new note maybe to pause on for today.
Yeah. I mean, the last thing, before we truly like conclude, I think I just wanted to read this like report from Sasson summarizing the relationship that he established with 3 Syrian prime ministers over the course of this time.
Oh my God.
He says, over the past 2 years, we have established friendly relations with 2 Lebanese prime ministers, Khayr al-Din al-Adhab and Emir Khalid Shabab, with 3 prime ministers in Syria, Jamil Mardam, Lufti al-Hafar, and Nassa al-Bukhari. Our relationship with the 3 prime ministers in Damascus was largely confined to talks on joint work within the Jewish and Arab peoples, a peaceful resolution to the Palestinian issue, and recognition of the rights of both parties. Although our accomplishments were few, mainly due to the lack of funds, these few were crowned with success and demonstrated the importance of this relationship. Thanks to it, we established first-hand information and succeeded in influencing, to a certain degree, the development of affairs in both countries, especially in Syria. We were able to penetrate the Arab Parliamentary Conference in Cairo, learn its confidential plans and decisions, and raise a number of questions that highlighted the importance of the Zionist project in Palestine and its impact on the Levant countries. Through this relationship, we were able to learn what was going on, not only among the various political organizations in Syria, but also in the corridors of power, and we had no small degree of influence over their orientations, whether in terms of their composition or their activity. Recently, following the fall of the Syrian National Bloc and the collapse of the national government in Syria, we have been keen to establish good relations with the Syrian opposition. At a recent meeting of one of our envoys with the 2 opposition leaders in Damascus, we heard encouraging statements, and they expressed their willingness to work together with us.
Rough.
Yeah. It's rough. There was, like one last point I was thinking of that I wanted to make to sort of loop it back to our first conversation. It is interesting how al-Bakhri and even before that, like al-Baroudi, they were also eager to emphasize that like it wasn't because of any actual commitment to the Palestinian cause that they were people who were like aiding the revolt in Syria. It was only because of money,
right? Which
is like goes back to this thing. It's like, well, no, don't worry. It's like it's not like we actually want to help them. It's just we need money. It's like a way of making yourself palatable. But
it's it's not a great sign. An indication of
it shows you're
priorities.
Reasonable. If your priority is money, then you're someone who can be talked to.
Exactly. But
there's someone we can deal with.
So maybe next time, since we're kind of in the middle of the revolt, it might be interesting next time to read about the pacification campaign when Britain really gets involved in like 38 and 39 after the Peel Commission, because that's also like a real breeding ground for like the Haganah and the various like Jewish paramilitary groups, which ultimately get armed by the British and kind of deputized by them in a way to suppress like the Palestinian uprising. And, that goes a long way to build the infrastructure for what would later be the IDF and also the intelligence services. We'll get to all that stuff next time. But until then, dear listeners, stay vigilant.
Peace.